Story, Dead-Eye Chapter. Umba heard the rooster crowing. That meant it was morning. Instinctively, Umba's right hand felt for the white cane that was at the side of the bed. Umba had a condition that made him completely blind, therefore, his fingers groped until they found the cane. Automatically Umba remembered that the bed was 20 paces away from the washroom. The suitcases that contained his clothes were 8 paces on the right from the washroom door. The bags were in a precise order that was arranged by the caretakers. Umba's caretakers were denizens of Usai. Usai meant smoke, and the residents were made of a vapor. They were not born that way. The village of Usai in East Africa was affected by the radiation from a fallen meteorite, which had transformed the inhabitants into the smoke form. Umba had lived in Usai for 4 weeks ever since his father Shaitani had left him there. Umba never heard from Shaitani again. Therefore Umba felt abandoned and useless. Furthermore, Umba believed that Shaitani feared his powers. Umba killed any living thing that he laid eyes on. But it was not a natural condition. A mutant woman had placed a curse on Umba. The incident occurred 5 weeks before. Shaitani was a warlord and a mercenary. Umba was a soldier in his father's army. One of the Shaitani's clients requested the transport over land of a cargo from Yemen to Egypt. Shaitani entrusted the job to a lieutenant. The lieutenant also looked after Umba, who was 15 years old. The cargo traveled in a tinted jeep that was driven by an unknown driver. Umba and the other soldiers provided security, and they traveled in 7 jeeps. The soldiers were attacked by robbers on the route. The soldiers defeated the robbers, and Umba had investigated the cargo's jeep to see if the occupant was injured. Inside the jeep he saw a masked driver, and in the back seat was a young woman. "From now on you'll kill all that you lay eyes upon," said the woman. The woman's face was the last thing Umba saw. Umba went blind and he collapsed. Then Umba awakened to darkness and the shouts of the soldiers that had missed his gaze. The gaze had killed several soldiers. They became paralyzed, their brains and hearts stopped functioning. Afterwards Umba was sent to Shaitani. More people died because of Umba, and he received the nickname Dead-Eye. As a result, Umba was dropped off at a house in Usai. Nevertheless, Umba was determined to overcome his condition. In the mornings Umba continued with his regular exercises. He performed 200 push-ups. He had measured the length of his room, therefore, he made flips from one end of the room to the next and back. After breakfast, Umba settled at a table where he cleaned his rifles and handguns. Additionally, Umba practiced breaking down and building up the weapons. The matron of the house, Abzul, and her children encouraged Umba. Shaitani paid Abzul. Sometimes Abzul mothered Umba. She often fixed the bandana that covered Umba's eyes. Although Umba's curse didn't affect those in Usai because they dispersed out of Umba's sight. Still, Umba suffered moments of depression, especially when he heard the laughter of the children whenever they played their games outside the house. Moreover, Umba became silent whenever he went outside and he felt the sun rays. He relied on both his imagination and his memory to experience the outside environment. It was in those moments that Umba wished for his father and a cure for his condition. But Umba lost hope as the weeks passed. Chapter T'Challa flew in a stealth presidential jet to the desert camp in North Africa, where Shaitani had made a cellular phone call to Ororo, Shaitani's niece. Shaitani wanted one thing from Ororo, that she take care of his son. The request was unexpected because Shaitani had disowned Ororo. Shaitani had not finished the call since the signal was lost. Therefore, Wakanda's intelligence division took 2 hours to trace the call that was made to the red phone in the presidential office. A Wakanda spy satellite provided surveillance of the camp for T'Challa. The spy satellite displayed dead bodies in the camp. T'Challa landed the small jet inside the desert camp. It was around 8:00 am in the morning. The heat of the sun did not affect T'Challa because of the black body armor weave suit that he wore. There was a frequent weak wind, which blew dust over the bodies of soldiers. Some of the dust particles caught the lenses on T'Challa's mask. T'Challa recognized that the soldiers had killed themselves with their guns. T'Challa's hyper-hearing picked up no faint breath from the bodies. Moreover, the soldiers' bodies surrounded a bullet-riddled hut. T'Challa went to the front of the hut and he found Shadani dead from gunshots. Shadani was in his late 40s. He had a beard and shaven-down hair. T'Challa's strong vision discovered an impression in the blood near to Shadani. T'Challa realized from his tracking experience that the impression was most likely from a woman's boot. T'Challa watched about the surroundings and a woman was not among the dead. Then T'Challa studied the landscape of the area. There were no hills or high rocks. Therefore T'Challa couldn't use the time-space computers on his sword that was magnetized to his back to travel back in time and view in secret the incident that occurred in the camp. As a result, T'Challa called Ororo with his Kimoyo palm-held supercomputer. T'Challa's wife appeared on the Kimoyo's screen. Ororo was black, she had blue eyes, long white hair and a small nose. Ororo was 30 years old. Shadani's dead, said T'Challa. There was no reaction from Ororo. T'Challa understood since Shadani had killed Depa-word mutants that Ororo, a mutant herself, had known. Then Shadani had attempted to take Ororo's life. I have just entered Usai. I will call back once I have Deadeye. Sweetheart, said Ororo. I'm heading back home. Dear, said T'Challa. All right, said Ororo. T'Challa ended the call. Then he touched the icon on the screen, which connected to the spy satellite. The image of the camp appeared on the screen. T'Challa chose the X-ray function of the spy satellite and the new image appeared. T'Challa manipulated the image on the screen with his thumb until he found the weapons cache. The cache was in the north side of the camp. T'Challa did not want the weapons falling into the hands of scavengers. T'Challa went to the cache, which was covered. T'Challa removed the covering. Then T'Challa took the sword from his back. Nano-robots sheathed the sword's blade. The nano-robots receded into the hilt. Immediately T'Challa slashed through the missiles, rifles, and launchers. T'Challa placed all the explosives in a heap and he ignited them. The time-space computers teleport T'Challa into the jet. Concurrently the explosives blew up in a fireball. T'Challa piloted his jet to Wakanda. Meanwhile in East Africa, Ororo landed her presidential jet in Usai. The houses in Usai were dilapidated. The lanes were vacant. Dogs and fowls roamed freely. Ororo knew about the plight of the residents and she felt their presence in the air currents. I know that you are there. I am looking for Deadeye, said Ororo. But no one answered. Consequently Ororo used her mutant abilities. Ororo created an air inversion. The air above became warmer than the air below and it trapped the villagers in the middle. Slowly a grey vapor formed into bodies that each had a head, 2 arms, and 2 legs. The bodies ranged from children to adults. That way, said a person and pointed to a yellow house. Thank you, said Ororo. A short wall bordered the house and there was a yard in the front. Ororo entered the property since there wasn't a gate. What kind of a person is Deadeye if Shadani raised him? Ororo asked herself. Suddenly the matron and her family appeared at the house's door. Who are you? Inquired the matron. Ororo. I'm Deadeye's first cousin. Shadani is dead and he entrusted Deadeye to my care. The matron didn't trust Ororo. Shadani hadn't mentioned Ororo. However, Umba knew about Ororo. Umba was near the door and he felt his way out of the door with the cane. His presence was made with the tapping from the cane. Shaitani's revelation of Umba's connection with Ororo was crude. Umba was watching Ororo and her husband on the television. They had done a heroic deed that saved the world. "She's your family. But don't tell anyone that," said Shaitani. Moreover, Umba was aware that Ororo and her husband were the presidents of Wakanda and that the country was special with regards to science and medicine. "I can be cured in Wakanda," thought Umba while he exited the house. "I know her," said Umba. Ororo looked at the black teenager who was 5'7" in height. He had broad shoulders. He was physically fit because of the training. A red bandana was tied around his head and it covered his eyes. "He's blind," thought Ororo. Shaitani had told Ororo that something was wrong with Umba. "What is your name?" asked Ororo because she doubted that Deadeye was the teenager's name. "Umba. They call me Deadeye because I kill people with my eyes." Ororo approached Umba and she held his left arm gently. Ororo was uncertain if Umba was a mutant or a meta-human. "You aren't blind?" asked Ororo. "I am blind," replied Umba as he raised his head to where the voice came from. Ororo had taught mutant teenagers with devastating powers at the school of her mentor Professor Charles Xavier. As a result, Ororo was not put off by Umba's lethal powers. "But I can be cured in Wakanda, right?" asked Umba. "Cured?" thought Ororo. "We can try," replied Ororo. Ororo waited for 30 minutes as the matron and her children gathered Umba's belongings. But Ororo told the matron to keep the guns in the house. Umba didn't protest since he was interested in getting to Wakanda and having his eyesight returned. The household carried the bags to the jet. Meanwhile, Umba held onto Ororo's right arm as they walked carefully to the jet. Afterwards, Umba bade farewell to his caretakers. Ororo guided Umba into the co-pilot seat and she strapped the seat belts over him. Ororo sat in the pilot's seat. "How long have you had the powers?" asked Ororo while she steered the jet into the sky. "Just over a month. Ever since the woman placed the curse on me," responded Umba. "A woman?" said Ororo. Then Umba related the story of the woman to Ororo. "T'Challa and I will have to look into this," said Ororo. "Do you know where your mother is?" "Dead," answered Umba. Umba had no memories of his mother. The matron was the closest motherly figure that Umba had in his life. The most of Umba's life was spent fighting battles at Shaitani's side as a child soldier. Sometimes Umba heard gunshots and the screams of people that came from his memories. Ororo learnt more about Umba from her questions for the duration of the flight to Wakanda. Ororo realized that Umba was nothing like his father. Ororo contacted T'Challa and she told him to meet her at Central City Medical Complex. Chapter T'Challa waited on the skypad, which was on the top of the medical complex. Ororo's presidential jet landed and the door opened. Ororo came out and Umba held her arm while they descended the door's steps. Umba held the white cane in his right hand. T'Challa ran over quickly to provide additional assistance. "T'Challa, meet Umba," said Ororo. "Good to meet you," said T'Challa. "Hi T'Challa," said Umba. "The doctor is waiting," said T'Challa. The group went to the elevator. T'Challa stood on Umba's right and Ororo stood on the left. The couple exchanged glances while the elevator went to the eye care department. Both Ororo and T'Challa knew that Umba's welfare was an additional responsibility. But T'Challa and Ororo were prepared to take on the challenge. The elevator stopped and opened up on a corridor. Ebo, the eye specialist, was waiting. Ebo led the group into the laboratory. Umba explained his condition to Ebo. "We will run a few tests to find out the facts of the condition," said Ebo. The first test was on a plant. Umba stood in front the small plant and he removed the bandana. Instantaneously the plant withered and died. The second test was done on a metal. Umba removed the bandana in view of the metal. There was no affect. Ebo recorded the information from both tests. "All right. We will probe the eyes next," said Ebo. The probe was done in an observation room. Umba was placed in a specialized chair with assistance from T'Challa and Ororo. Then T'Challa and Ororo exited the room. Umba was left alone in the room. T'Challa and Ororo entered the observation booth that was on the other side of the observation room. Ebo told Umba over a communication system to take the bandana from his eyes and to keep his head still. Umba followed the instructions. Ebo activated the robot that came out the ceiling in the observation room. The robot came over Umba's eyes and it remained there for 10 minutes. A detail image of Umba's eyes were on a screen inside of the observation room. Ebo explained the nature of Umba's condition from the image. His eyes are emitting an invisible energy wave. The eyes do not have a cornea and a retina. Those parts have been replaced by something I have never seen before, but it is the source of the energy wave, said Ebo. "Can he be cured?" asked Ororo. "No. But we can remove the eyes and replace them with manufactured ones," replied Ebo. "How soon?" inquired Ororo. "Tomorrow. It is a 5-hour surgery done by robots controlled by the surgeons. But I am not sure how long it will take with this case," responded Ebo. "We understand," said Ororo. The probe ended and Umba returned the bandana over his eyes. T'Challa and Ororo took Umba out of the room. They informed him of the prognosis and the suggested operation. "I want to do it," said Umba. Ebo had left T'Challa and Ororo. He returned with a specialized visor. The visor was a computer that aided sufferers of blindness. "He can wear this in the meantime," said Ebo. Ebo explained the functions of the visor. The ends of the computer covered the ears of the wearer and the computer spoke through the ends. The computer told the wearer the location of objects, the description of environments. It read for the wearer and it stored information in its memory like names. The visor's lens was a long strip. A vertical red light moved constantly from right to left across the lens. The visor was carefully slipped onto Umba and the bandana removed. Umba adjusted to the visor after a while. "Now can you describe the woman who had placed the curse on you?" asked Ororo. "Yes," replied Umba. T'Challa and Ororo took Umba to the intelligence division. Umba described the woman's facial features to a computer and a sketch was produced. T'Challa ordered the division manager to distribute the sketch internationally. The division also had information for T'Challa and Ororo. The lead in the investigation of the rumored third axis was gone. The lead was a network of computer files around the world. The division had hacked into the files and had followed a trail, but a computer virus destroyed the trail. "Stay on it," said T'Challa, because the third axis were reorganizing the international criminal underworld and political powers. Meanwhile, Ororo spoke with the presidential press department. A press release was sent to the media that informed them of Umba's addition to the household of the president and his relation to Ororo. Umba's picture was taken and sent along with the press release. But Umba's background was kept out of the press release. The reason was that Ororo wanted T'Challa and herself to speak with Umba first about the extent of his child soldier activities and if he had remorse for what he had done. T'Challa and Ororo had the discussion with Umba at their residence. T'Challa and Ororo lived in the farmlands of Wakanda. Umba sincerely stated that he was sorry for his actions. T'Challa and Ororo were satisfied with the apology because they had encountered rehabilitated individuals who had done far worse than Umba. Afterwards, T'Challa and Ororo explained the rules of the house with Umba. The group was seated in the veranda. The sun was setting since the day had passed quickly. "First rule is honesty," said Ororo. Secondly, no swearing. Thirdly, you can speak to us if you have a problem. Ororo looked at T'Challa. Ororo's facial expression was, do you have anything to add? T'Challa remembered when his father King T'Chaka had given his household rules. We will enroll you in the education program. All your assignments must be completed on time, said T'Challa. We will add more rules as they become necessary, said Ororo. Do you understand? Yes. And thanks for giving my sight back, said Umba. Ororo glanced at T'Challa and then she returned her focus on Umba. You haven't been cured as yet, but the doctors will try, said Ororo. The next 3 hours T'Challa and Ororo guided Umba around the house for the visor to remember the layout. The house was 3 stories. There was an elevator. The house also had a gym, a library, 3 guest rooms, a dinner room and a living room. However, Umba wasn't told about the existence of the hidden room that contained confiscated weapons of T'Challa's enemies. Later T'Challa and Ororo prepared dinner and they served Umba. Then Umba remembered an issue while he ate. What about the money? Asked Umba. What money? Inquired Ororo. Shadani had bank accounts. He said that there were millions in the accounts and some of it was mines, replied Umba. We will look into it, said Ororo. There was another question on Umba's mind. How do you end up saving the world so many times? Inquired Umba. Ororo thought about the question briefly. Because we care about the world, thus we use our abilities towards its safety, replied Ororo. That's what makes you a hero? Asked Umba. Yes, answered Ororo. Umba was retired to his room after the dinner. Ororo had ordered new clothes that were expected the next day for Umba. T'Challa and Ororo went into the living room and they discussed Umba. What do you think about him? Asked Ororo. He has potential, replied T'Challa. Just needs the correct guidance. And if he becomes rebellious, how do we treat with that? T'Challa recollected briefly on his rebellious time as a teenaged king with radical ideas that still affected Wakanda after all those years. Ororo also reflected on her rebellious years when she was considered a goddess. As the situation deems fit, responded T'Challa. Later T'Challa and Ororo took a shower together. I will trace those bank accounts to find out who hired Shadani to transport that woman, said T'Challa. You know he got those millions from murder, said Ororo as she stepped out of the shower. T'Challa came out behind Ororo. Ororo used her mutant abilities to heat the air around T'Challa and herself. The heat dried their bodies. T'Challa kissed Ororo on her left shoulder. Ororo turned around and she kissed T'Challa on the lips. Suddenly T'Challa swooped up Ororo lovingly in his arms. The couple kept on kissing. T'Challa carried Ororo into the bedroom and he eased her onto the bed. 2 hours later T'Challa and Ororo neared another threshold of ecstasy. T'Challa and Ororo uttered each other's name. They reveled in the heat that came from each other's bodies. Ororo held onto T'Challa tightly. Gradually T'Challa slipped out of Ororo's embrace. Then T'Challa performed a trick on Ororo just as she peeked. T'Challa kissed Ororo hard on the mouth and it smothered Ororo's scream that resulted from the tremendous pleasure that ran through her body due to T'Challa's trick. Ororo kissed back with the same intensity as T'Challa. T'Challa returned into Ororo's tight embrace. He broke off the kiss. I love you, said T'Challa. T'Challa kissed Ororo about the neck and her bosoms while the couple came down from the heights they had reached. Eventually Ororo's body stopped shaking. 10 minutes later Ororo drifted into a sleep. T'Challa reached for the Kimoyo. He accessed the hacking supercomputers in the intelligence division and T'Challa commanded the computers to search for Shadani's bank accounts. An hour later the computer had found the bank accounts that had a total value of $80 million. T'Challa made the computers trace the depositors of the monies. T'Challa left the program running on the Kimoyo and he went to sleep. Meanwhile Ororo dreamt about her first time in the X-Mansion. In the dream Ororo guided Umba through her journey from a goddess in Kenya to becoming a member of the X-Men. Ororo awakened from the dream. T'Challa was asleep. Briefly Ororo analyzed the dream for its meaning since Umba was in it. Xavier recruited me to help the world. Am I doing the same with Umba? Thought Ororo. But how is he going to help the world? Ororo asked herself. Then she went back to sleep. In the guest room on the ground floor Umba couldn't sleep as he eagerly anticipated the return of his eyesight. Chapter The wealthy kingdom of Chejula was located near Greece. The king of Chejula was Midas and he was 28 years old. Midas became king when he took control of his father who was a famously flamboyant king. In fact the entire royal family were free spenders before Midas intervened. The wealth came from the minerals that the kingdom had in abundance. Consequently the royal family had so much money that they did not know what to do with it. Midas had grown up viewing his father and uncles squandering thousands on expensive overseas trips, purchasing football clubs, having pop singers perform at birthdays, buying strange art items and betting on prestigious horse races. Midas never liked the family's flamboyance, even though he benefited from fencing lessons, a high education, a first-class self-defense training, foreign travel, and the women. But Midas wanted more in life. Midas was in the process of creating a global empire. The empire was the rumored Third Axis. Moreover Midas had inherited the mutant ability that was secretly possessed by the first king who was Chejula. Midas injected biochemicals into a person through touch and the biochemicals attached themselves to the person's brain. The biochemicals granted Midas control over the person. Furthermore Midas had discovered and translated Chejula's hidden book that detailed the king's life as a con artist. Chejula had hunted monsters that were actually meta-humans and mutants. Chejula brought the monsters under his control. Then Chejula would let the monsters terrorize a village or a city. Chejula would be hired to vanquish the monster. Chejula made a fortune and in his latter years he founded the kingdom named after him in the 12th century. However Chejula had preserved all the meta-humans and mutants that were under his control. The woman named Malice was one of the mutants under Chejula's control and she was the one who cursed Umba. Midas learned about the mutants and the meta-humans, hence he ordered the resurrection of Malice from her sleeping chamber in Yemen. There was a United Nations no-fly zone over Yemen, therefore, Malice was transported through the porous Yemen borders. However Hatch and Baron the other members of the Third Axis wanted the transporters eliminated. Midas yielded to the demand and he sent Malice to kill Shaitani and his army. But Malice never told Midas that Umba was not eliminated. Therefore Midas didn't understand when Hatch fumed that their operation was compromised. Hatch faxed a sketch of Malice. Hatch was a sentient artificial intelligence from 6 million years in the future. Hatch had traveled back into time with an ark of sentient robots. Hatch and his kind had replaced the inhabitants of 2 cities and they planned to replace more people. But Hatch did not tell Midas of the expansion plan. Hatch's overall plan was to save his future from destruction. Hatch had made contact with the Chejula kingdom for a mineral that the sentients required. Midas found out Hatch's true nature and they had struck a deal. Hatch would provide information on future events. In return he would be guaranteed the mineral and a distraction to bring back larger items from the future. "What are you going to do about her?" asked Hatch over the computer. The message was encrypted and the computer had the decoder key. "This is minor. Her face can be masked with an imager." "There is no problem," replied Midas. "She is a liability. The sketch originated from Wakanda. She has to be taken care of, said Hatch. Really? When she was terminating our competitors over the last weeks, she wasn't a liability then? Asked Midas. Do not worry. It is not healthy. Besides, we have to be focused for the coming hours and we need her for that project. Hatch hung up. That was rude, remarked Midas. Midas surveyed the Mediterranean Sea from his beach house office. The port of Chedula was on the left side of the view. Midas took the sketch of Malice from the fax. Then Midas went to the entertainment area where Malice watched television. Midas had kept a professional relationship with Malice, even though he was attracted to her. Malice appeared to be a woman in her late 20s. She had brown skin and minor scars were on her shoulders. Her black hair was long and curly. She had a small earring in her nose. Malice was born to a thief from Asia Minor in 1087. Malice lost contact with her mother when she was 8 and since then Malice stole to survive. Malice's mutant ability to control the molecules in living creatures appeared when she was a teenager. Malice also had the secondary mutant ability of limited telepathic suggestion. At first Malice used the abilities when she was provoked and her victims claimed it was black magic. But Malice became addicted to her powers and she used it indiscriminately. Chedula had hunted and captured Malice. He took control of Malice, but he never violated her. Chedula had kept a strictly business relationship. Malice received food and shelter from Chedula until he retired. But Chedula had branded Malice on her arm with a small tattoo. Malice became angry whenever she viewed the tattoo, but she didn't show it. Furthermore, Malice knew that she was under Chedula's power, which she referred to as a spell. Malice knew that Midas possessed the same power. Moreover, Malice realized that Midas never wanted anything from her other than to end the lives of his enemies. But Malice had liked Midas. Midas entered the entertainment room and he saw Malice lying on a sofa. He presented the sketch to Malice. "Someone saw you," said Midas. "Is there anything you want to tell me?" Malice viewed the sketch. Then she looked at Midas. He showed no anger. "There was a boy when I was traveling. But I blinded him," said Malice. "The warlord's son," said Midas as he remembered Shaitani's file. "You should have told me." Midas took back the sketch and he went close to Malice, in the process closer than he had ever gone before. Midas and Malice stared at each other for a few seconds. Then Midas kissed Malice. Afterwards they made love. The alarm on Midas's watch awakened him. He was in the bedroom and Malice was sleeping next to him. Midas gently awakened Malice. "Come on, we have to be in Hong Kong in the next hour," said Midas. Malice kissed him lovingly. The feeling in the kiss surprised Midas and he kissed back with equal passion. Then he broke it off. "We can continue this after," said Midas. Midas and Malice dressed quickly. Then Midas placed an imager on Malice that created a hologram, which covered her body. The imager made Malice appear to be a younger and fairer woman. Afterwards Midas and Malice boarded the small royal jet that was on the helipad. Midas piloted the supersonic jet towards Hong Kong. Midas was friendly with the Hong Kong authorities, therefore, he entered the area without hassle. Midas landed at his vacation residence in Hong Kong. Later on he drove in a luxury sports car to a remote beach. On the beach Midas and Malice met a preserver. The preserver was attired in a black cloth that hid the top of his head and mouth. The preservers kept Chedula's monsters alive in sleeping chambers. Chedula had paid the preservers for their lifelong services. The preserver had awakened a new monster as Midas had requested. The monster had 4 demonic heads and 12 arms. More so, the monster was 9'5" in height. Midas spoke to the monster. "Avista, I want you to head in that direction," said Midas while he pointed out into the South China Sea. "Do you want us to drown?" asked Avista. All four heads frowned. Internally, the heads were connected by a nervous system that ran from the central head to the other three. "No, Avista," said Midas. Then Midas turned to Malice. "Increase his height," said Midas. Malice looked at Avista. "How tall?" asked Malice. Midas stared into the sky. "Sky is the limit," said Midas. Malice looked at the sky, then she focused her powers on Avista. Immediately Avista grew. Midas held Malice's hand and he led her back to the car. Midas's plan was two-folded. The first part of the plan was the destruction of the South Asia Pacific Islands. Then Baron, who was a developer, would construct artificial islands and rent them to the dislocated people. Baron was an old business associate of Midas's father. Baron owned real estates and public utilities around the world. Midas assisted Baron with the procurement of those properties and assets. Therefore Midas shared the wealth that was generated. The second aspect of the plan would divert attention away from the 100 miles of equipment from 6 million years in the future that would appear in the North Atlantic for Hatch. Avista walked into the water as he grew and grew. The preserver faded into the air. Chapter T'Challa, Ororo, and Umba arrived 3 hours before the start of the surgery. Umba wanted to reach early. T'Challa, Ororo, and Umba waited in the lounge. Then T'Challa and Ororo received the call from the Defense Division. The call stated that a monster, which reached into the stratosphere, was moving through the Asian Pacific, destroying islands, and would eventually reach Australia. T'Challa and Ororo had to intervene in the matter. "Umba, we have to leave you. There is an emergency that requires our skills," said Ororo. Ororo felt badly that she had to leave. "The emergency is hero stuff?" asked Umba. "Yes," said Ororo. T'Challa contacted Ebo about the situation. Ebo promised to supervise Umba. T'Challa told Ororo and Umba of the arrangement with Ebo. Then T'Challa and Ororo departed. Umba became totally bored after an hour had passed. Ebo occasionally checked on Umba. Then 2 hours passed. Umba sat in his chair and he listened to the environment. The low sound of the air conditioning unit was the only thing that existed. Then Umba heard a girl's voice and 2 adults. The visor described the girl and the 2 adults to Umba. Then the visor told Umba that the girl had entered the lounge and that she headed in Umba's direction. The girl was Enzi. She was 16 years old and had suffered a damaged left eye in a freak accident that morning. The 2 adults were Enzi's parents. Enzi sat 1 seat away from Umba. Enzi had a patch on the left eye. "Hello," said Enzi. "You're Umba. I recognize your picture from the press release." "Hi," said Umba. "Why are you here?" asked Enzi. "I have an operation," replied Umba. "Me too. But it is a minor one," said Enzi. "What are you going to do after the operation? Will you remain in Wakanda?" "I will go to school here," replied Umba. "Really? Then we will be attending the same district education program," said Enzi. "I don't understand," said Umba. "I live in the farmlands where you reside. Therefore we are in the same education district." Umba recognized that he had an opportunity to know about the school he would be attending. Various teachers tutored Umba as he grew. Shaitani had hired the teachers. "What do they teach in the program?" asked Umba. Umba heard a beeping. The sound came from Enzi's phone. Enzi took the phone from her pocket. "State message," said Enzi. The phone stated that Nginda, the opposition leader, had left Wakanda for the Asia-Pacific to aid in the assault on the monster that had so far killed millions, displaced countless inhabitants, created tsunamis, and destroyed islands. "That is serious," said Enzi while she returned the phone to her pocket. Back to your question. The program teaches physics, chemistry, and biology. Then we have archery, range shooting, self-defense, all sorts of stuff. They teach range shooting, said Umba. I can shoot. What distance can you hit a target? 200 yards, that alone, said Enzi, and she laughed. I don't mean to laugh. It is all right, said Umba. By the way, my uncle Taku is having a wedding. Do you want to come? Asked Enzi. Yes, said Umba. Suddenly T'Challa appeared in the room. The president, Enzi said in awe, and she stood up. Keeping Umba company, remarked T'Challa. Yes, Mr. President, said Enzi. T'Challa turned to Umba. Umba, we need your help, said T'Challa. In fact, Umba was a desperate last resort. T'Challa and Ororo had witnessed as the most powerful superheroes in the world had failed against Avista. T'Challa had even called Nginda for assistance. What about the operation? Asked Umba. We will come back for the operation, replied T'Challa. This is hero stuff? Asked Umba. Yes, replied T'Challa. Umba was silent. Then he said, all right. Chapter T'Challa and Umba teleport to the Defense Division. Umba was given a military combat uniform for the mission. Umba was handed a boots that had magnetic properties, which was essential for the mission. Umba suited up and he was ready for the challenge. Afterwards, T'Challa and Umba teleport to the presidential jet that was in the Asia Pacific. Ororo piloted the jet. T'Challa and Ororo explained the mission. We want to use your powers on a monster, said Ororo. The monster in the Pacific? Asked Umba. Yes. How did you know? Asked Ororo. A girl in the lounge told me, replied Umba. We will take you right up to it, said T'Challa. There was a loud noise from the cockpit controls. That's the United Nations Security Council calling back, said Ororo. The United Nations Security Council coordinated the assault on Avista. The United Nations superhuman program called the Protectors, in collusion with the supergroups of the major countries, were in the attack. But the combined forces were unable to defeat Avista. However, Avista's progress was held by a sustained attack. But T'Challa and Ororo wanted a suspension of the attack for Umba to use his powers fully on Avista. T'Challa took the call. The United Nations and Wakanda weren't on good relations, but they made an exception because of the dire situation. Meanwhile, Ororo concentrated on Umba. Nervous? Asked Ororo. A lot, replied Umba. T'Challa and I will let nothing happen to you, said Ororo. T'Challa turned around in the pilot chair. They want to see him, said T'Challa. Ororo held Umba's right hand and she led him to the front of the cockpit. A camera on the dashboard captured Umba's face and transmitted the image to the United Nations Security Council. What's your name, son? Asked the United Nations General Secretary. Umba. But people call me Deadeye. Deadeye, said the United Nations General Secretary. You have one chance. Make it count. Presidents T'Challa and Ororo, please state your path of attack so we can pull out forces. T'Challa stated the coordinates of the flight path to the attack. Furthermore, Ororo outlined the plan to Umba. 10 minutes passed and the mission began. Ororo piloted the jet and she concealed the presidential jet's approach to Avista with thunderclouds. The sky darkened. T'Challa and Umba teleported outside of the jet and they appeared on top of the jet. Instantaneously the magnets in T'Challa and Umba's boots were activated. Therefore T'Challa and Umba were stuck to the jet. T'Challa held Umba firmly by the collar and the left arm. Umba heard roaring. At first he thought it was the wind. but it was roaring like from a lion. The roaring scared Umba and he flinched. "It's going to be okay," said T'Challa confidently. "When I give the signal, take off the visor." Umba toughened up himself. The presidential jet neared Avista's central head that was behind a dark cloud. "Get ready," said T'Challa. Avista growled as he realized that the attacks had stopped and he proceeded forward. All the eyes on the foreheads glowed deep red. Avista's topmost arms reached over the heads and the hands were clenched. The presidential jet broke through the cloud. "Now!" shouted T'Challa. Umba slipped the visor off his face. Umba's eyes gleamed. Instantaneously Avista's central head seized and the brain died. A chain reaction was created and it spread through the nervous system that connected to the other heads. Slowly the other heads shut down and Avista halted. T'Challa and Umba teleported into the presidential jet. Ororo flew the jet around the four heads. They appear dead. "Umba, you did it," said Ororo as she remembered her dream about Umba becoming a hero. "Well done," said T'Challa and he patted Umba's left shoulder. Chapter Midas and Malice were in the beach house. Malice rested on Midas when suddenly Midas said, "Marry me." Malice rose sharply. She stared fiercely into Midas's eyes. Malice held up her arm that had Chejula's brand. "Remove the spell first," said Malice. Midas held the arm and the biochemicals detached from Malice's brain. The biochemicals raced to Malice's arm and they passed through the skin into Midas's hand. "There," said Midas. Malice felt the freedom that she had to destroy Midas. 100 different ways to end Midas's life came to Malice's mind that she found it hard to think straight. Eventually Malice's affections for Midas won over her anger. Malice rested her head back on the Midas's chest. "Yes, I will marry you," said Malice. Midas's cellular phone rang. It was Hatch. Hatch was furious because he had to shut down the transfer prematurely, which was a result of Avista's demise. Avista's destruction was not a part of Midas's plan. Midas intended to return Avista to a chamber after 8 hours. "But you did receive most of the items, so everything went as planned." "I will call you tomorrow," said Midas. Midas contacted an informant in the intelligence service of a major country. The informant responded in 7 minutes. The informant reported that Avistas was killed by Umba aka Deadeye. Deadeye was from Wakanda. Moreover, the manner Deadeye had killed Avista was in the report. "Umba. Wasn't Shaitani's son named Umba?" asked Midas aloud as he remembered the files. "Then there is Wakanda," thought Midas. Wakanda and Chejula had a history. A king from Wakanda along with an Ethiopian king and Chejula had hunted a monster together. But the monster was under Chejula's control. Still, the Wakanda king had slew the monster. The record of the historical hunt was in the Chejula Book of Kings. The fact that Chejula had the monster under his control was kept out of the Book of Kings and written in the secret book. The informant sent a picture of Deadeye and Midas realized that it was Shaitani's son. Midas turned off the cellular phone and he tossed it away. He dropped back on the bed. "What's wrong?" asked Malice. "When you saw Shaitani's son, was blindness the only curse that you placed on him?" "No. He will also kill anything that he lays eyes on," replied Malice. "Well, he killed Avista," said Midas coolly. "Do you blame me?" asked Malice. "No," replied Midas. "Do you love me?" inquired Malice. "Yes," responded Midas. "I love you even more now," said Malice as she slid across Midas. Midas and Malice made love. Chapter Umba was congratulated by everyone he met on the international military air carrier. Umba felt useful again despite his blindness. The superheroes that participated in the assault had gathered to discuss the disposal of Avista. Avista stood on the Pacific Ocean floor and the ocean surface reached him at the knees. The rest of Avista's anatomy was massive and the best means of disposal seemed to be dissection. Umba sat around a table with the greatest heroes on earth. Umba was seated between T'Challa and Ororo. Umba listened as T'Challa and two other men referred to as Tony and Reed controlled most of the discussion. The heroes agreed on the stabilization of Avista's body in the meantime before the Earth's governments made their decision. Then the meeting ended. "We have returned to Wakanda for your operation," said Ororo. "I don't want the operation again," said Umba. "I want to use my powers to be a hero. Will you teach me?" Ororo was shocked at first and then she smiled at T'Challa. T'Challa nodded. "Yes, we will teach you," replied Ororo. T'Challa and Ororo assisted in the securing of Avista in two ways. Ororo provided assistance with the weather conditions and the transport of equipment about Avista, whereas T'Challa worked out the logistics of the monumental task. During the course of the operation, Chejula's brand was discovered on Avista's back. "I have seen that symbol before," thought T'Challa. Meanwhile, Umba waited patiently in the presidential jet until he fell asleep. Ororo awakened Umba. "We're going home," said Ororo. T'Challa, Ororo, and Umba arrived at the house after 2 days. T'Challa went directly for the library. Ororo followed T'Challa because she had an idea of what T'Challa sought in the library. T'Challa retrieved the fighting manual of the Black Panther kings that was passed from father to son. Ororo smiled because her assumption was correct. "Go easy on him," said Ororo. "I will," said T'Challa. For the first couple of training sessions, the Book of Kings and the Book of the Queens were next to the fighting manual. T'Challa took up the Book of Kings and then he remembered that he had seen Chejula's brand in the book. T'Challa opened the book to the story of Az the Black Panther. The king of Ethiopia came to Wakanda but Az confronted him on the border. The Ethiopian king stated that a monster, which claimed to have originated from Wakanda, terrorized the northeast nations. The Ethiopian king wanted Az's assistance in the capture of the monster. Az thought that the monster was one of the creatures that were mutated by the vibranium meteorite that crashed into Wakanda centuries before. Therefore Az broke the isolation policy and he went with the Ethiopian king to slay the monster. They met Chejula on the hunt. The monster was hunted down and Az killed it. Az recorded the symbol that he saw on the monster. T'Challa closed the book. Then he decided to check Chejula's account of the hunt for further information on the symbol. T'Challa told Ororo of his plan. "I'll call the king of Chejula," said T'Challa. "I will check on Umba in the meantime," said Ororo. The intelligence division contacted T'Challa and he was informed that an identical virus to the one that stopped the Third Axis files trace had also ended the trace of a depositor to Shaitani's bank account. Then the Third Axis was connected to Shaitani, thought T'Challa while he called Chejula. On the other side of the house, Ororo spoke with Umba. "T'Challa will teach you self-defense and I will teach you to master the powers for different situations," said Ororo. "Could I get a visor that I don't have to take off every time I use the powers?" asked Umba. "I don't see that being a problem," said Ororo. "Oh, I met a girl, Enzi, at the eye department. She had invited me to her uncle's wedding. Taku or something. Can I go?" "Sure," replied Ororo. "We know Taku." Taku was T'Challa's childhood friend and T'Challa and Ororo had planned to attend the wedding. T'Challa called Ororo. They had a meeting with the king of Chejula in the next hour. Chapter Midas pondered on his fate. He had finished a conversation with T'Challa over the symbol. T'Challa requested a view of the famous Chejula Book of Kings that Midas's father had advertised to the world. "Should I kill him?" thought Midas. Midas had both weapons and a suit from the future that were provided by Hatch. Furthermore, Midas believed T'Challa's may detect the biochemicals if they were administered on him. Midas played out multiple scenarios if he attempted to take T'Challa's life. But Midas calmed himself. T'Challa wanted to see a symbol, which didn't mean that T'Challa suspected Midas of anything. Still, Midas took no chances and he sent Malice from the palace back to the beach house. Midas had announced his marriage the night before and the kingdom was abuzz with the news. T'Challa and Ororo arrived at the Chejula palace at the agreed time. Midas took his guests to the Book of Kings. T'Challa used his Kimoyo to translate the chapter that dealt with the three hunters. But T'Challa had learned nothing new about the symbol. T'Challa thanked Midas for his time. "Not a problem," said Midas. Midas watched as the presidential jet departed and he believed that he had passed the worst. Chapter Taku's wedding ceremony was in South Wakanda. Enzi introduced Umba to her friends. Meanwhile, T'Challa and Ororo spoke with Taku and his bride. Then the dancing aspect of the ceremony commenced. The married couple slow danced in a special area. Ororo rested her head on T'Challa's right shoulder as they moved in time with each other and the music. Ororo spotted Umba and his friends. "Umba hasn't wasted time breaking into life in Wakanda," commented Ororo. "You cleared the way," said T'Challa. "Always the flatterer," said Ororo with a grin. "I only speak the truth," said T'Challa. "But Umba will become a target. He has a unique ability. We have to guard him against mind control." "I agree. I will arrange for him to get psi shields," said Ororo. Both T'Challa's and Ororo's kimoyos vibrated. The caller was the manager of the spy satellite division. The manager reported that several large objects had appeared in the North Atlantic during Avista's rampage. The objects were transported to 2 cities. T'Challa and Ororo decided to investigate the matter. Next story: Singularity is here. Technological singularity is the technological creation of smarter-than-human intelligence. Story: Singularity is here. Chapter Ororo thought about a vacation while she relaxed in the co-pilot seat of the small presidential jet. The jet's destination was the Wakanda Intelligence Division. "Remember Kuana Island?" asked Ororo. T'Challa turned from the autopilot monitor, and he looked at Ororo. Then T'Challa remembered Kuana Island. Ororo and him spent 3 days on the island. All communications devices were turned off. T'Challa and Ororo arrived at midday and they made the lone house their temporary home. They swam in the sun-kissed blue ocean and they relaxed on the white beach. Afterwards the couple made love. The memory faded in T'Challa's mind. "We should go back," said T'Challa. "We'll make a day," said Ororo while she loosened her white hair from a ponytail. The hair ended at her shoulders. The autopilot indicated that the presidential jet had reached the intelligence division. The building had 2 levels above ground and 15 levels below the ground. The Spy Satellite Division was a subsection of the Intelligence Division. Moreover, the various spy androids in the world reported to the Intelligence Division. T'Challa and Ororo went to the Operations Center. Modokai, the manager of the Intelligence Division, presented the findings of the spy satellites on a computer screen for T'Challa and Ororo. The computer screen showed several miles of objects that appeared in the North Atlantic, and then they were moved to 2 European cities. The entire operation was done with stealth technology. Normally, the spy satellites saw through most stealth, but an analyst had made the discovery after multiple reviews. "Send 1 spy android to each of the cities," said T'Challa. "Tell the androids to check out the locations where the objects were taken." The spy androids, both named Casper Cole, drove into the cities, 30 minutes after they received the orders. The androids relayed visually whatever they saw to the Intelligence Division through satellite links. The androids viewed streets devoid of vehicle traffic and pavements that were absent of pedestrians. All vehicles were parked and businesses seemed closed. "Go to X-ray view," said T'Challa. The command was transmitted directly to the androids. The androids activated their X-ray visions. The X-ray view displayed humanoids inside the city's buildings. However, the humanoids weren't warm-blooded. "Intensify scan," said Ororo. The androids increased the power of X-ray views. The views showed that the humanoids were metallic. "What are they?" asked Ororo softly. Suddenly a mass of airborne objects erupted out the buildings. The mass of objects resembled a swarm of locusts. The objects engulfed the androids' vehicles and the androids went offline. "A trace is being done on us," said a field technician in the operations area. "Terminate the links," said T'Challa. "It's too late, Mr. President," said the field technician. Chapter Who are they? Suns eventually die. But humans successfully restarted their solar system's sun for 6 million years, until nature finally prevailed, and the sun no longer restarted. Moreover, the sun was expected to explode when it died. Therefore humans deserted Earth and the solar system for settlements in other galaxies and nearby solar systems. Yet the artificial intelligence robots called sentients that lived on Earth believed in theory that they could save the planet from the sun's demise, hence they remained. The sentients created a metallic and multi-layered shield in the mesosphere. The shield covered the entire Earth, and it was constructed by trillions of nano-robot spores that were released into the atmosphere. The sun exploded and miraculously the shield protected Earth. The sentients kept the shield around the Earth for any eventualities. Furthermore, the shield had ports that allowed the passage of probes and spaceships through it. As expected, the temperature of the Earth fell drastically, and the sentients adapted to the frozen conditions. Then a robocracy was created. The robocracy was based on the sentients' social communities and networks. Each community was allowed to conduct itself in its own way, withstanding that its activities did not adversely affect another community. An oversight committee ensured that the community's interests didn't clash. After several years, a few humans returned to see the aftermath of the sun's demise, and they were surprised that Earth survived. The sentients had multiplied by then and they were the dominant life form on the planet. Nevertheless, the humans wanted a few small settlements on Earth for scientific purposes. The robocracy obliged. The human scientists returned to Earth and eventually the humans began to speak of returning to Earth in larger numbers. The humans had created means of living in sunless climates, the production of food in such environments and the construction of oxygen domes. The robocracy wasn't concerned with the human resettlement since the sentients were still dominant. That was until the sentients began to die in large numbers from a mysterious disease that only affected them. Normally a sentient lived for hundreds of years. But the illness reduced the sentient's lifespan significantly and repairs were futile to combat the disease. Eventually, the sentients discovered that a previously unknown radiation type that seeped out of the Earth's surface was the cause of the disease. The radiation was natural and it manifested itself after millions of the years of slow development. The sentients realized that they faced extinction. The sentients didn't leave Earth because they worked hard to save it. As a result, the robocracy decided to stop the radiation at its initial development. That meant that a group of researchers had to travel back into time. Hatch was chosen to lead the research group. Hatch had the most expertise on the radiation, and he precisely found the time period that the radiation originated. Furthermore, Hatch was dying faster than the other sentients, because he exposed himself to great levels of the radiation to learn more about it. The robocracy admired Hatch's dedication and sacrifice. Hatch accepted the responsibility of being the savior of his kind. Then Hatch searched the human history records, and he discovered that the radiation existed under populated human cities. Still, Hatch presented the information to the robocracy. The human element bothered the robocracy because the cities needed to be converted into laboratories and it had to be done secretly. The secrecy involved the replacement of the city's residents with the researchers. It comes down to self-preservation. It is either us or them, said Hatch to the robocracy. The robocracy deliberated over Hatch's statement and they eventually agreed with Hatch. Hatch and a few scouts traveled into the past through a time machine. They went to the first city that was in a North European country. The small city was inland and it suffered from an economic downturn. The main employers were the factories and they had closed. Some people migrated to other cities and towns for work. Subsequently, a drug cartel used the city as a point of transit for its products as a few of the unemployed residents could not resist the easy money. Hatch's calculations about the origins of the radiation in that time period were correct, hence the city's residents were replaced. It occurred on a single night. Millions of nanorobot spores came through the time machine and they descended like a swarm of locusts on the city. The nanorobot spores went into every place that had humans. The nanorobot spores entered the humans through the skin and inhalation. Then the nanorobot spores transformed the human cells into a techno-organic form that was controlled by the sentient, which was formed. The change was irreversible and the nanorobot spores essentially murdered the humans. The sentients had the option of resembling humans or turning into their technological form. The technological form was sleek and metallic. The eyes were black marbles. Hatch turned himself into nanorobot spores and he replaced the city's mayor because it allowed him access to governmental agencies. When in human form, Hatch looked 43 years old. His had brown eyes and shaven beard. He was 6'2" in height. Security was the next step in Hatch's operation. Hatch contacted the country's defense force agencies and the European Defense Agency. Hatch learned the identities of the key persons in the respective agencies. Then the nanorobot spores replaced the integral persons. As a result, the city was safeguarded from outside interference. If a visitor came to the city, that person was accommodated. The sentients had memories of those that they had replaced and it was used to treat with any visitor. However, if the visitor became a problem, then that person was replaced. The operation went swiftly and without incident. Nevertheless, Hatch had a problem with regards to a power source. The sentient's power source from the future could not be transported through the time machine because it became unstable. Hatch searched for a substitute power source and he discovered it. The substitute power source came from a mineral that existed in the kingdom of Chejula. Hatch traveled to Chejula and he met with King Midas for a business deal. Hatch pretended that he required the mineral for conversion in new plants, which would rejuvenate his city's economy. Midas was a criminal mastermind unbeknownst to Hatch. Midas was a student of criminology. He was 28 years old. He had bright green eyes, and he was 6'2" in height. His shoulders were broad and his hands were steely. He often wore sharp tailor-made business suits. Additionally, King Midas was a mutant. Midas's body produced biochemicals that were transferred to another person through touch, and the biochemicals attached themselves to the person's brain. Midas would have control over that person through the biochemicals. Moreover, Midas was creating a global criminal empire in two ways. The first method was the control of the powerful parallel economies of the world. The parallel economies were the black markets and drug cartels. Midas's second means of global power was the ownership and rental of vital properties and resources. Therefore, Midas was interested in Hatch's city because of its criminal element that he believed still existed. Midas determined that the city's mayor was a useful pawn in the capture of the city from the drug cartel. Midas shook Hatch's hand and he tried to use his powers. Subsequently, Midas discovered Hatch was not human. Hatch revealed his technological form in the confusion. Midas was a quick thinker and he made a business offer before Hatch decided what to do with him. Midas was knowledgeable in artificial intelligence developments, thus he realized that Hatch was a futuristic technology. Subsequently, Midas wanted information on specific future events in return for a guaranteed supply of the minerals with no questions asked about its true purpose. Hatch held Midas's life in his hands, yet he agreed to the business deal. Hatch viewed Midas as a cold, methodical, and sinister organism that was beyond human and sentient. There are scientists working on artificial intelligence as we speak when true singularity is already here, remarked Midas after the business deal was closed. Hatch understood the comment, but he said nothing about it. Hatch took the first shipment of the mineral back to the city. Promptly Hatch and his group worked on the radiation in the city. Then Hatch decided that the second large pocket of the radiation needed to be taken over. Another city was situated over the radiation pocket. But a rich and powerful developer named Baron owned most of the city. Furthermore, Baron was in an alliance with Midas as part of the global empire scheme. Hatch's assistants took over the city. As a result, Baron complained to Midas that there was a problem in the city. Midas recognized the similarities with the occurrence in Hatch's city and the strange activities in Baron's city. Thus Midas asked Hatch about the second city. Hatch revealed that he had taken over the city. Afterwards Midas had a meeting with Baron and Hatch. Baron was a large muscular man with the pure blood of European aristocrats in his veins. He was 45 years old and 6 foot in height. His hair and beard were red and grown out. Therefore Baron resembled a rugged mountain man. Baron's gait was aggressive and he had taken human life on numerous occasions in his career as a property owner and developer across the world. Additionally, Baron had the ability to absorb the life force energy of living creatures, which increased both his strength and durability. Hatch deemed that Baron was ruthless as Midas. "We can't operate like this. There has to be CO ordination," said Midas. "You can't keep taking over cities that we have business interest in and it will eventually draw attention." "I have that covered," said Hatch. "Sure you do. You probably have agents in the European Union and the European Defense Agency," said Midas. "Still, you're interfering with our business interests and we need to come to a suitable arrangement." Hatch considered that his mission was to save his kind from extinction, therefore he didn't care about Midas's ambitions. "Totally out of the question," said Hatch sternly, and he departed through the special communications system that he had given to Midas. Hatch continued his work in the two cities. Soon Hatch realized that he needed a full dome laboratory over the cities, because he was close to a breakthrough with the prevention of the radiation. The domes would expose the operation to the world, but it did not matter because of the quick results it would produce. Moreover, the domes would be destroyed after the operation was completed. However, the two domes and the subsequent transformation of the cities into full laboratories required large equipment from the future. The equipment was sent in stealth mode, but it was done over the Atlantic Ocean. The reason for the Atlantic Ocean delivery site was that the radiation had reached intolerable levels in the future, hence the Robocracy were unable to send the equipment from the locations of the radiation pockets. Notwithstanding, Hatch needed a distraction because the equipment would be in the transatlantic flying routes that was used by commercial and non-commercial planes. Hatch informed Midas. Midas said that he had the perfect distraction, but only if Hatch operated fully with the Alliance and supplied weapons from the future. Hatch agreed with Midas about operating with the Alliance, but it was a lie. Yet Hatch provided the weapons from the future. Subsequently, Midas released a colossal demonic monster called Avista in the South Asia Pacific. Avista was under Midas's control. The international community thought Avista was an attack on the planet. As a result, all airports worldwide suspended international and domestic flights, planes were grounded and planes in the air were diverted to the nearest airport. Additionally, all shipping vessels and small boats were sent to the closest port. Consequently, the North Atlantic was devoid of air traffic. Hatch's equipment arrived over the North Atlantic, and they hovered in the sky a few miles from Europe. The equipment was presumably undetected by the military scanners of the major countries because of the stealth technology. Hatch and his assistants flew to the equipment in their technological forms and they transported the equipment to the cities. Hatch had 8 hours for the operation. But Avista was killed before the time expired through the efforts of the Umba aka Deadeye, who was the teenage ward of the Black Panther, and Storm. All three took a part in finally stopping Avista. As a result, Hatch was unable to receive all the equipment. Hatch was in the base of operations that monitored activity in both cities. The assistants brought the information about the covered Wakandan communications. The sources of the links are in the vicinity of the Dome Shield sites, said an assistant. Take out the sources and find out who they were communicating with, said Hatch while he worked on a radiation reading. 1 minute later, nano-robot spores attacked the spy androids in their cars. The androids lost control of their vehicles and they crashed. The nano-robot spores encountered and overwhelmed the androids' cybernetics. Then the nanospores traced the communication links to Wakanda. Hatch was informed about the new development. Wakanda, thought Hatch. Hatch had intercepted a sketch of Malice that originated from Wakanda. The sketch of Malice was on the work table that was in front of Hatch. Hatch warned Midas about the liability of Malice to the equipment operation, even though Malice transformed Avista into the giant. But Hatch's warning was ignored. He believed that Malice was the reason Wakanda's agents were in the city. Hatch called for Mondo. Mondo was a combat sentient. "You're going to Wakanda, do as much damage as you can and report back," said Hatch while he took out a cellular phone from the jacket that was also on the work table. The jacket was for Hatch's human disguise. Hatch dialed the red phone in the Wakanda presidential office. Mondo was going to attack the very top of Wakanda's hierarchy, which would be wired into the rest of the nation's computer systems. Mondo transformed into a blue light, and he entered the cellular phone. The red phone was for any nation to call for assistance. Hatch's call was redirected to the Kimoyo's palm-held supercomputers that were on T'Challa and Ororo. Chapter: The Kimoyos rang. T'Challa accepted the call on his Kimoyo. Instantaneously Mondo entered the Kimoyo, and he gained access to all the governmental divisions that included the Defense Division. Mondo quickly spread like a virus throughout the divisions. Mondo corrupted and permanently deleted as much of Wakanda's cyber system, which was linked to most aspects of the citizens' lives. Mondo trampled down firewall protections and password-protected databases until he encountered the counter-virus program. The robust counter-virus program ran throughout Wakanda's cyberspace, and it was the first line of defense in Wakanda's cybersecurity system. Like clockwork, the hourly backup files of all the divisions that were stored on mainframe server farms in 30 stations were activated. The stations were located in different regions of Wakanda. Additionally, Wakanda's cyber networks and systems discarded the operating platform that they used and they upgraded to a higher operating platform. Furthermore, backup hard drives were activated and the old ones were switched off. However, the transition meant that all computerized functions in the country were temporarily shut down. All exits in buildings and homes were automatically opened as a safety protocol for the citizens because of the nationwide shutdown. Meanwhile, Mondo fought with the counter-virus program. The strong resistance surprised Mondo. Unknown to Mondo was that the counter-virus program sent information on him to a specialized unit that instantaneously broke down Mondo's composition and found weaknesses. T'Challa realized that Mondo came through his Kimoyo. But T'Challa placed the incident behind him. Emergency protocol stated that the Essential Intelligence Division personnel were transferred immediately to Station 5. T'Challa teleported most of the personnel and himself to Station 5. Meanwhile, Ororo went to the Education Division for Umba. Umba was Ororo's first cousin and she became his guardian when Shaitani died. Wakanda's education system never had an immigrant student. Umba was new to Wakanda, therefore he underwent an entry examination that determined his intelligence level. The Education Division created the entry examination specifically for Umba. Umba was 5'7". He was physically fit for a 15-year-old. The reason for the fitness was due to a rigorous life as a child soldier. Moreover, Umba was very agile because of practice. Finally, Umba was blind and his eyes emitted an invisible energy wave that killed any living organism that fell within the scope of the gaze. Hence Umba was called Deadeye. But Umba gave up a chance of regaining his eyesight when he went to Wakanda, because he wanted to use his abilities to become a hero like Ororo and T'Challa. As a result, Umba used a computerized visor that aided him to function despite the blindness and the powers. Umba's visor had a single lens strip and a vertical red light constantly moved from the left to right along the lens. The ends of the visor covered the wearer's ears and the computer in the visor spoke through the speakers that were in the ends. Moreover, the computer described the environment, recorded faces, voices, and names for future reference. It read for the wearer and it guided the wearer's ability to write. Ororo relieved the examiners from their supervision of Umba so that they followed safety protocol and the examiners went to the shelters as a safety precaution. Ororo explained to Umba that Wakanda's integrated computer systems were breached by an external threat. Ororo took Umba to Station 5. The reason was that Ororo didn't want Umba to feel abandoned every time T'Challa and her had an emergency. Moreover, Ororo wanted to end passing on the responsibility of Umba to different people whenever an emergency did occur. Station 5 was a 3-tier building in the Crystal Forest. The ancient forest was made crystalline by the vibranium meteorite's radiation. The vibranium meteorite crashed into Wakanda 10,000 years ago. Umba changed into a military uniform when he arrived at the station. Elsewhere, T'Challa oversaw the counter-virus program battle with Mondo. The battle was intense and neither side had the upper hand. As a result, Mondo changed tactics. Mondo resolved that he should leave cyberspace and replace a Wakandan. He would stay disguised as a Wakandan until an appropriate time when he would strike again. Eventually, Mondo exited Wakanda's cyberspace. Mondo emerged out of a computer terminal in Central City. Mondo converted from the blue light into a 6-foot metallic humanoid. He searched for a Wakandan but the streets were vacant. The counter-virus program tracker indicated the disappearance of Mondo from cyberspace. "Where?" asked T'Challa. The location was given to T'Challa and he relayed it to the time-space computers. The time-space computers teleport T'Challa and themselves to the site. T'Challa appeared mere meters from Mondo. T'Challa and Mondo were in the middle of a street. T'Challa had no doubt that he faced the attacker on Wakanda's cyberspace. Mondo observed T'Challa. Then Mondo released himself as nano-robot spores that shrouded T'Challa. But the vibranium body armor protected T'Challa. Thus Mondo relented and he reverted to the humanoid form. Mondo stood an arm length away from T'Challa. T'Challa clutched his sword's handle. Instantaneously the sword demagnetized from the body armor. T'Challa swung the sword from off his back. Simultaneously the nanites that sheathed the dark force energy blade ran into the hilt. Mondo ducked out the blade's reach. T'Challa moved forward and he tried to cut Mondo about the body. Mondo calculated all of T'Challa's moves. Therefore Mondo effortlessly maneuvered out of T'Challa's attack. Mondo became tired of his defensive tactic, thus he attacked T'Challa. A double-fisted Mondo punched T'Challa in the chest. T'Challa was thrown into the side of a nearby vehicle due to the force of Mondo's attack. Mondo waited for movement from T'Challa, but there was none. Therefore Mondo resumed his search for a suitable candidate for replacement. T'Challa pushed his way out of the crumpled side of the vehicle. T'Challa realized that Mondo had outthought him. Nevertheless, T'Challa had an idea and he teleported in front of Mondo. "We haven't finished as yet," said T'Challa. T'Challa attacked, but he changed sword hand after 2 slashes missed their mark. Mondo adjusted to the change in attack, yet the time he took provided T'Challa with an opportunity. T'Challa pivoted on the left foot while the right foot shot up from the ground and it slammed hard into Mondo's face. Mondo was affected for a moment, but it was a second opportunity for T'Challa. T'Challa brought his right foot down. Simultaneously, he shifted the manner in which he held the sword. T'Challa turned the sword so that the blade ran along his extended left arm. T'Challa slightly bent his left knee. Then T'Challa quickly turned his upper torso to the right. Meanwhile T'Challa swung his left arm and the sword swiftly across Mondo. Thus T'Challa dissected Mondo into 2 with the sword. The dark force energy did the rest and it permanently destroyed Mondo. T'Challa waited for a few moments to ensure that the threat was truly neutralized. Afterwards T'Challa teleported to the station. Chapter Hatch traveled through the communications network and he emerged in Midas's office. Midas was not alone in the office. Baron and Malice were also there. Malice was exotically beautiful and she appeared to be in her late 20s. She had curly shoulder-length black hair. A small earring was in her nose. Furthermore, Malice had physic control of the molecules in living creatures and she had limited telepathic suggestion powers. Additionally, Malice was inventive when she used her powers and she enjoyed using the powers to harm others. Originally Malice was Midas's enforcer and she eliminated most of the world's major crime lords for Midas's global takeover. However, Midas and Malice had fallen in love with each other. Midas proposed and Malice accepted. Moreover, Midas considered Malice an equal partner in his global empire. Hatch got straight to the point for his visit and he pointed to Malice authoritatively. "She has undermined my operation. The Wakandans came to the cities today. I warned you that she was a liability," said Hatch. "I have a name and I can damage the organic part of you, so put down your hand," said Malice. Hatch put down his arm not out of respect but to calm himself. "What did you do with the Wakandans?" asked Midas. "I sent an operative to destroy their capability to hamper my operation," replied Hatch. "Wasn't that overreacting?" said Midas. "Because if Wakanda survives your attack then they will definitely hamper your operations. The Black Panther and Storm were here in my office just the other day. They were looking for information on the symbol that was on a vista. I didn't panic, instead I was careful and clear-headed. As a result they left as clueless as they came. You should have done the same." Baron was unaware of the visit, hence he glanced briefly at Midas. "My mission is more serious than your schemes. Your incompetent creature cost me valuable resources and your lack of secrecy has exposed my work," said Hatch. Hatch calculated that he had adequate reserves of the mineral to power the laboratories. "I'm ending our deal," said Hatch. Midas was already angry with Hatch for the complaints and the insults to Malice. "Very well," said Midas. Hatch dialed the number for the communications system in his city. An assistant answered the call. Hatch transformed into an orange light and he entered Midas's office telephone. Hatch emerged in the base. Suddenly Hatch felt fractionally weaker than before. He was dying faster than he had calculated. "I have to speed up the operation," thought Hatch. But Hatch received an urgent message from the second city. The equipment received for the laboratory dome was insufficient for the second city. The laboratory dome was needed for a proper deconstruction of the radiation and observation. Subsequently, Hatch decided to continue the mission in the first city. All the assistants in the second city were summoned to the first city. Consequently, the second city was left vacant because of the exodus. Moreover, the sentients destroyed their equipment in the second city. Meanwhile, Hatch supervised the containment of the radiation in specialized pipelines that were drilled into the ground. Hatch ordered the release of the dome after the assistants of the second city arrived. The metallic dome rose from the perimeter of the city and it gradually covered the city. Additionally, nano-robot spores demolished the city in 5 minutes. The rest of the equipment self-constructed towering grey structures out of the rubble. The towers were research instruments. Chapter T'Challa accelerated the presidential jet when he saw that the dome was covering Hatch's city. The intelligence division had traced the source of the call to T'Challa's Kimoyo. Thus T'Challa and Ororo headed for the city covertly, and they kept the European Defense Agency out of the matter because it was assumed that the agency was compromised. However, an international political scandal would ensue if the European Union found out about T'Challa's and Ororo's unauthorized entry because they were the leaders of a foreign country. Furthermore, Ororo brought Umba along for the mission. Ororo was confident that Umba could handle himself. Moreover, Umba had a militarized visor. The visor had the standard features along with wireless capabilities, and the single lens strip became transparent for Umba to use his powers. The presidential jet slipped between the two halves of the dome that closed on each other. A forest of towers was inside the dome. Red lights flashed on some of the towers while other structures appeared dormant. Metal avenues were in between the towers. Ororo saw the invisible activities that the towers performed. Ororo viewed the environment in terms of electrodes, and she saw billions of them running along the towers and racing on the avenues. Meanwhile, T'Challa observed that the dome emitted a twilight illumination over the new city. The visor described the view for Umba and he was awed. Hatch monitored the presidential jet and he realized that Mondo had failed in his mission. Therefore, Hatch ordered the nanospores to attack the intruders. The millions of nano-robot spores erupted out of hatches that were on the sides of the towers. Immediately, the presidential jet's warning systems blared and a computer displayed the multitude of objects that approached from the right. "I'll take care of them," said Ororo while she unfastened herself the CO pilot seat. "We'll maintain radio silence." The visor told Umba of Ororo's actions. "Where are you going?" asked Umba, concerned. "Outside to deal with a threat," replied Ororo calmly, and she patted Umba on the right shoulder to reassure him. T'Challa steadied the presidential jet. Ororo activated a control on a wall panel. A small airlock emerged in the flooring and Ororo looked down at the passing towers. Then Ororo leapt out of the airlock. The airlock automatically closed. Ororo fell for a few moments for the presidential jet to completely pass over her. Afterwards, Ororo manipulated the air currents, which then lifted and carried her to wherever she wanted. Ororo stabilized herself in the air and she faced the oncoming horde of nano-robot spores. Ororo sensed that the nano-robot spores were partly electronic, thus she summoned an electromagnetic pulse. But the nano-robot spores were unaffected by the electromagnetic pulse. Moreover, the rest of the laboratory dome was unharmed. The sentients were constructed by anti-electromagnetic technology. Ororo realized the outcome of her attack at the last minute and she was surprised. Meanwhile, the nano-robot spores converged victoriously on Ororo. Still, Ororo kept her wits and she created a massive pressure dome. The pressure dome repelled the nano-robot spores, but they quickly returned. Immediately, Ororo fired lightning bolts from her fingertips. The lightning bolts struck the body of nano-robot spores. Yet the nano-robot spores were unharmed and they pressed towards Ororo. Ororo created several tornadoes around herself and the tornadoes engulfed the nano-robot spores. Amazingly, the nano-robot spores consolidated and they gradually fought out their prisons. Then the nano-robot spores rushed at Ororo. "Move it," said Ororo to herself. Ororo descended into the avenues with the nano-robot spores chasing behind her. The collective of the nano-robot spores made an energized buzzing noise. The nano-robot spores tried to trap Ororo by splitting their forces. One group chased from the rear, a second and third group flanked Ororo on the left and right, another group kept above Ororo while a final group attempted a frontal attack. Ororo sensed the trap while she bolted along the avenues and she summoned plasma energy from her hands. Ororo directed the plasma energies towards the base of a tower. "Please work," thought Ororo. The plasma energies blasted a hole straight through the base of the tower. Ororo slipped into the hole and she barely escaped the nano-robot spores trapped right as it closed on her. Ororo shot upward through the tower and the plasma energies cleared her path, which was cluttered by crisscrossed metal pipes that were lined with green lights. Some of the nano-robot spores pursued Ororo inside the tower while the rest surrounded the tower. "I need a bomb," thought Ororo. Ororo busted out the tower's summit. Then Ororo heated all the hydrogen particles in the environment. The resultant explosion pulverized the tower and it dispersed the nanospores, but it didn't destroy them. The nano-robot spores backed away briefly and then they resumed their attack. Ororo fired the plasma energies randomly from her hands as she flew downwards. Eventually Ororo flew into a network of leaking pipelines. The pipelines carried the radiation and the hydrogen explosion damaged them. Ororo realized that the nano-robot spores stopped their pursuit. "Why?" questioned Ororo in her mind. Then Ororo noticed the particles that flowed out the pipes. The nano-robot spores moved away to safety from the particles. Ororo used the leaking radiation to her advantage. Ororo damaged several other pipelines with plasma energy. The radiation flowed freely from the pipelines. Then Ororo created strong wind currents that blew the radiation out in all directions. Immediately the radiation killed the nano-robot spores that were caught in the wind currents. The other nano-robot spores fled to safety. Ororo intensified the range of the wind currents. Slowly the wind currents began to cover more of the dome laboratory. Then her thoughts went to the whereabouts of T'Challa and Umba. Elsewhere the presidential jet was chased by two swarms of nano-robot spores. T'Challa piloted the jet at a breathtaking speed through a cluster of towers to evade the nano-robot spores. T'Challa spotted an alley that was created by two rows of towers. The alley was on the right. The alley seemed impossible to enter on such short notice because of the explosive speed at which the jet traveled and the tight angle of the alley. But T'Challa was determined to enter the alley. T'Challa switched off of the jet's main single engine that was in the back. Simultaneously T'Challa activated and deactivated the reverse engines in rapid succession. The reverse engines were on the wings, and they fired up and died repeatedly. T'Challa felt as the jet slowed fractionally. Then T'Challa turned the jet hard into the alley. He rotated the steering until he slanted the jet. Then T'Challa quickly switched on the main engine at full throttle before total momentum was lost. The majority of the nano-robot spores overshot the alley and the tail enders pursued the jet. The jet roared out the alley and T'Challa sent the jet into a steep climb. "All right in the back there?" asked T'Challa. "Yes," said Umba while adrenaline flowed through his veins. Suddenly the jet's warning system indicated that the nano-robot spores had ceased their pursuit. Then the main computer stated that wind currents had increased. "That can only be Ororo," said T'Challa. T'Challa spun the jet out of the steep climb. A tremendous flash of lightning caught T'Challa's attention. The lightning had occurred on the other side of the laboratory dome. Then a constant flow of lightning shot up from the ground to the dome. T'Challa knew the lightning was a signal from Ororo. T'Challa flew the jet over to Ororo's location. T'Challa kept a vigilance for the nano-robot spores, but they had disappeared from sight. T'Challa arrived at Ororo's location. Then T'Challa and Umba disembarked from the jet. Ororo explained her discovery of the pipelines and the contents. "It is harmless to us but lethal to them," said Ororo. "Why did they do this to the city for something that harms them?" asked Umba. "That's what we have to find out," responded T'Challa while he observed the towers. Chapter Hatch received a report that stated that the air in the laboratory dome was 100% saturated with the radiation because Ororo destroyed the main pipeline network. There was no method of cleansing the air without going outside. But that meant certain death. Hatch made up his mind. The mission was a failure. "Prepare the time machine and begin evacuations. Send up the communications tower so I can speak with the field agents," said Hatch. The time machine was activated and the communication tower, which was in the middle of the city, rose to top of the dome. The summit of the tower was allowed out of the dome. Hatch contacted the field agents in the defense services. "The mission is aborted," said Hatch. The statement was a self-destruct command for the field agents. The robocracy was explicit that no trace of the sentience should remain if the mission failed. Hence the field agents carried out the self-destruction. They silently turned into a black vapor and they disappeared. Hatch supervised the evacuation until he was the last one left. Then Hatch deactivated the time machine. "I won't go back, a failure," said Hatch while he turned on the laboratory dome self-destruct countdown sequence. Chapter Ororo returned from her investigation of the communication tower. "I found their base," said Ororo while she landed near to T'Challa and Umba. A minute later, T'Challa flew the presidential jet while he followed Ororo. Ororo was outside the jet and she flew on the air currents. Eventually Ororo stopped at the base of a tower. Ororo fired intense plasma energy into the base and she formed a hole. The radiation-polluted air entered the hole. Moments later, T'Challa, Ororo and Umba walked into the base and they ventured into the vacant command room. Hatch hid behind a panel and he swiftly moved from the concealment. Hatch channeled the last of his strength to his right hand, which shined. T'Challa heard Hatch's movement whereas Ororo felt it from the disturbed air currents. Instinctively T'Challa and Ororo concentrated their efforts on Umba's safety. But T'Challa's reflexes were quicker than Ororo's. Consequently T'Challa pushed Umba to the floor. Hatch fired the energy ball from his right hand. The energy ball was headed for Ororo and she dived out of the path. The energy ball crashed into a terminal and it exploded. Ororo was on the floor and she fired plasma energy from her left hand. The plasma energy struck the large hanging monitor that was above Hatch. The monitor fell and Hatch instinctively caught it. But Hatch took his eyes off of T'Challa. T'Challa leapt at Hatch with the sword drawn. But T'Challa didn't kill Hatch. T'Challa wanted answers. Therefore he threw down Hatch and T'Challa pinned Hatch to the floor with the sword through Hatch's right shoulder. "Who are you? Where are the people that lived here?" asked T'Challa while he secured Hatch's left arm. Hatch activated his self-destruction. Hatch turned into a black vapor, which faded into the air. T'Challa pulled his sword out the floor. "T'Challa," called Ororo. T'Challa went over to the work table that Ororo stood next to. Malice's sketch was on the work table. Umba had described Malice and a sketch was done. Then the sketch was sent confidentially to all the intelligence services in the world. Furthermore, an investigation found that Malice was associated with the Third Axis. Whoever it was had access to international secret services, said T'Challa. Hence we were right to avoid the European Defense Agency, thought T'Challa. And it was linked to the Third Axis group, commented Ororo. The work table was an enlarged touch screen. There were voluminous files and folders in icon form in a section of the table. T'Challa pressed the icons and he opened all the documents that were scientific information. The information was displayed in bright holograms above the work table. T'Challa surveyed the charts. Meanwhile, Ororo found the time machine. Ororo checked the last destination date. 6 million years into the future, thought Ororo. stayed in the main area while he listened to the visor's descriptions. T'Challa finally deciphered the numerous charts and reports. They were artificial intelligence from the future. They are dying from a radiation that first appeared in our time period. They murdered the citizens of this city and another. Then they replaced the deceased, said T'Challa. Why? Asked Umba. They wanted to secretly conduct experiments on the radiation. It seems that they were close to a breakthrough, hence they turned the city into a giant laboratory, responded T'Challa. And they would have gotten away with it if the intelligence division hadn't discovered the objects in the Atlantic, said T'Challa. Ororo returned to the table. Anything about the third axis? Inquired Ororo. Nothing yet, answered T'Challa. Suddenly the monitor next to Umba came on. Umba turned to the sound. Baron's face was on the screen. Hatch, what are you doing to that city? Asked Baron quickly. Then he realized that Hatch was not there, instead it was Umba. Furthermore, Baron recognized T'Challa and Ororo in the far right corner. Immediately Baron terminated the call and the monitor went blank. T'Challa and Ororo rushed to Umba. T'Challa and Ororo hadn't seen Baron's face. T'Challa looked at the monitor for an option to trace the caller. But there was no such option. We'll get the caller's identity from the visor's memory, said Ororo. Then Ororo sensed that the base altered. We should get out of here, said Ororo. The laboratory dome self-destruct countdown sequence ended. The dome and laboratory turned into a black vapor and disappeared. The process was completed in 3 seconds. T'Challa, Ororo, and Umba found themselves suddenly in bright sunshine. But it was not for long. Soon European Defense Agency spy drones were overhead. Military helicopters and Air Force planes came from every direction. How are we going to explain this mess to the European Union? Asked T'Challa. By the time we're finished, the person who called could disappear, said Ororo. T'Challa understood Ororo. Therefore T'Challa took out his Kimoyo and he activated the self-destruction of the presidential jet. Then T'Challa, Ororo, and Umba were teleported to Wakanda. A quantum globe appeared inside the presidential jet. The quantum globe sucked the jet into it and then it exploded. Meanwhile Baron contacted Midas. Black Panther and Storm saw me, said Baron calmly. When? Where? Asked Midas, confused by the information. Midas was in his office and he watched the news about Hatch's city on the television. The news disrupted Midas from his wedding plans. Midas and Malice were to wed the next day. I called Hatch and they were there, responded Baron. Most likely they'll be coming for me. I'll take care of them. Midas pondered. Maybe I should have done away with Black Panther and Storm when I had the chance, thought Midas. I'll give you some insurance. I'm sending my resources to help you, said Midas. That will not be necessary, said Baron. Baron, if you lose then it is highly likely that they will link me to you, said Midas. I will not lose, said Baron proudly. I'm still sending them, said Midas, and he ended the call. Midas contacted the preserver in charge of the sleeping meta-humans and mutants that were under Midas's control. There were 10 meta-humans and mutants in all. Which one do you want awakened, sir? Asked the preserver. All of them, said Midas. Next story, Baron's Wrath story, Baron's Wrath. The presidential jet's control panel constituted 5 computers, each showed different data. The first computer detailed the flight path to Baron's Mesa. The second displayed the twin towers on the mesa in which Baron lived. The third computer carried the jet's diagnostics. The fourth monitored the radar. Finally, the fifth computer outlined Baron's history. The fact that Baron was bankrupt a year ago, yet in 12 months he had acquired nearly all the prime commercial real estate in the world, was the most salient aspect of the information. The acquisitions were done through various holding companies. "Where did he get the finance?" asked Ororo. Ororo was 30 years old. Her eyes were naturally blue. Her equally natural white hair ended on her shoulders. "We'll ask him," said T'Challa. T'Challa was 35 years old. His hair was shaved down. The shoulders were broad. The body was like a construction worker's. T'Challa was in the pilot seat and Ororo was in the co-pilot seat. Ororo's left hand rested on T'Challa's right thigh, whereas T'Challa's right arm was over Ororo's shoulders. Wakanda's spy division had tracked Baron all day. Baron spent most the day in Asia, where he finalized a deal to construct artificial islands for the people displaced by the meta-humans rampage. Afterwards, Baron returned to his home. The spy satellites indicated that 8 unidentified people were inside the towers before Baron had arrived. T'Challa and Ororo were unsure if the 8 people were security or associates of Baron. Suddenly the radar computer became active. An object closed in quickly on the presidential jet. Ororo also felt the presence in the air currents due to her weather manipulation powers. T'Challa took over the control of the jet from the autopilot. But it was too late. The object traveled like a comet and it punched the small jet out the air. Ororo's attempts to stabilize the jet with manipulated winds were useless. The jet crashed into the valley on the outskirts of Baron's towers. The jet's vibranium skin absorbed the impact. T'Challa killed the engine. The jet flipped over once, then it became still. The radar computer indicated that the object was in the vicinity. "It is returning," said Ororo. T'Challa unfastened from the seat. Ororo was already out of her seat. "Then let's return the greeting," said T'Challa. T'Challa and Ororo kissed each other deeply and they pressed their foreheads together. "I love you," they said. Afterwards T'Challa slipped the woven vibranium body armor mask over his face. T'Challa took up his sword. Then T'Challa opened the door and he exited. Ororo slipped out the jet with lightning bolts in her hands. The couple scanned the starry night sky for their attacker. Suddenly T'Challa felt odd. He looked down at his feet and they were gone. Moreover, the rest of his body rapidly disappeared. He heard Ororo gasped. T'Challa looked across at his wife and he tried to hold her arm. But Ororo was almost completely gone, only her head remained and it also faded. "Ororo!" shouted T'Challa. "T'Challa!" shouted Ororo. Then the couple vanished. T'Challa reappeared in a lightless and cold realm. He called for Ororo but it was futile. Ororo also appeared in a similar realm and she realized that T'Challa was not there. T'Challa spoke to the twin time-space computers that were on the hilt of the sword. "Where are we?" asked T'Challa. "A pocket dimension," replied the computers. "Then get us out," said T'Challa. "We have to configure the teleportation." "It will take time," said the computers. "How much?" "We can't say, hurry," said T'Challa. Meanwhile, T'Challa's and Ororo's prisons were 2 floating yellow spheres. The spheres flew into the hands of their creator. The creator resembled a 14-year-old girl. She was ebony. Her pupils were white and her hair shaved down. Chejula's symbol tattoo was on her right hand. A sphinx landed next to the girl. The Sphinx had the head of a lion, a hawk's beak, a monkey's tail, black feathered wings grew out of its back and its feet were like an eagle's. Yet the creature had human arms and upper torso. Chejula's symbol tattoo was on the left shoulder. A hover pod screamed behind the girl and the creature. A robot piloted the hover pod and Baron was the passenger. The hover pod stopped in front of the girl and the creature. Baron resembled a mountain man. He was 45 years old. He had fiery red beard and hair. Baron stared at the slender girl. "What's your name again?" asked Baron. "Sphere." "What will become of them?" inquired Baron. "They'll die," replied Sphere. A small smile broke Baron's hardened face. Baron gestured for Sphere to enter the hover pod. Sphere understood and she climbed the steps, which had emerged from the hover pod. Meanwhile Baron gestured for the Sphinx to return to the tower. The creature took to the air and it disappeared in a flash. The hover pod also sped towards the tower. Baron contacted Midas over the special communications device that was a small cube. Sphere didn't pay attention to the conversation. Sphere felt good about herself because she had spared T'Challa and Ororo from the other creatures that waited in the tower. Sphere detested bloodshed, hence she had volunteered to kill T'Challa and Ororo humanely. Sphere estimated that T'Challa and Ororo would die within the next 30 minutes like the animals she had experimented on and then extracted from the pocket dimensions. Baron's twin towers had 50 floors above ground and 6 below the Earth's surface. The towers were connected by 5 enclosed bridges. The hover pod halted inside the highest floor on the second tower. The 9 creatures awaited in a group. Baron surveyed the group while he ended the conversation with Midas. "You'll be rewarded for the swift outcome with some additional time outside the sleeping chambers," said Baron frankly. The robot translated Baron's statement into the respective tongues of the creatures, although some of the creatures spoke the same language. Sphere and the robot disembarked from the hover pod. Then Baron took control of the hover pod and he flew to the first tower. Sphere strayed into a room. The 2 orbs that contained the prisoners followed her. The room's window viewed the sky. Sphere stood close to the window and she stared at the sky, which she hadn't seen in centuries. The robot asked if she wanted privacy. "Yes," replied Sphere. A metallic tentacle grew out of the robot's left side and the tip of the tentacle touched a button on the wall. A door fell down from the ceiling. Sphere resumed her search of the stars. She concentrated so hard on a constellation that she didn't hear T'Challa behind her. T'Challa slipped his right hand over Sphere's mouth. Sphere's shriek was smothered. T'Challa's left arm brought Sphere close to him and he pinned her there. "Shhhh," whispered T'Challa. T'Challa heard Sphere's heart beating loudly. His hyper sense of smell didn't detect Ororo. T'Challa looked about the room. He saw the orb. "Where's the woman?" whispered T'Challa. Sphere pointed frightfully towards the orb. "Did you put her in there?" inquired T'Challa in a low voice. Sphere nodded a confirmation. "Take her out," said T'Challa. Again he whispered with a measured amount of authority. Sphere concentrated and the orb cracked in the middle. Then the orb broke into pieces. Ororo appeared. "Are you all right?" asked T'Challa. "Yes," responded Ororo in a whisper. T'Challa focused on Sphere once again. "I'm going to release you." "Don't scream," said T'Challa. "All right." Sphere nodded her agreement quickly. T'Challa took his hand from Sphere's mouth. "How many others are protecting Baron?" asked T'Challa. 9, answered Sphere. "Where is Baron?" quizzed Ororo. "I don't know," responded Sphere. T'Challa spotted the symbol on sphere, and it was the same symbol that was on the meta-human that had attacked the South Asia Pacific. "Where did you get this?" asked T'Challa. Abruptly, a panel slid down the window. Immediately T'Challa's hyper-hearing alerted him to the sounds in the walls. Crawling. Scraping. An unseen creature bonded with the atoms that made up the walls. T'Challa took the sword from his back. "Traitor!" shouted the unseen creature. A spear grew swiftly out of the wall and it was aimed at Sphere. T'Challa sliced off the top of the spear and he saved Sphere. The sounds became louder in T'Challa's ears. "The entire room is a trap," thought T'Challa. T'Challa's instincts told him that a full attack was imminent. Thus T'Challa scooped up Ororo in his right arm and he held Sphere. T'Challa leapt towards the door. Ororo instinctively created an air pressure to knock over the door. Concurrently, spears quickly extended from the walls. Similarly, spears extended from the floor and ceiling. As a result, the spears crisscrossed the room. There was a wicked laughter from the room while the attack was done. A metal spear struck Sphere across the side of her head and she lost consciousness. Another spear stabbed Sphere deeply into her shoulder. Ororo also received scratches to her body. The door flew down. T'Challa's leap carried the group into a small corridor. T'Challa became aware that they were not alone. Creatures stood in both directions of the corridor. "Told you that she wasn't alone," said the Sphinx. Ororo fired plasma energy from her hands at the two groups. But two force fields blocked the plasma energy. The force fields were created by a woman with Chejula's tattoo on her forehead. A green pigmented woman fired a disc-like energy projection at Ororo. T'Challa's reflexes sprang to action. T'Challa swung his sword into the energy projection's path and he parried it with the sword's dark force energy blade. The energy projection was deflected and it struck the wall. Then the energy projection returned to the green pigmented woman's hand like a boomerang. The energy projection left a dent in the wall. T'Challa's hypervision saw through a crack in the dented wall and he noticed another room. T'Challa told the sword to teleport Ororo, Sphere, and himself to the new room's coordinates. The sword obeyed. The group vanished from the corridor and they reappeared in the new room. T'Challa and Ororo took out their Kimoyo's palm-held supercomputers. The Kimoyos were linked to the spy satellites. "Is the plan to take out the bodyguards and find Baron?" asked Ororo. "Yes," replied T'Challa. "I noticed the symbol on the guards. Evidently Baron was behind the South Asia Pacific attack," said Ororo. T'Challa heard the scrapping in the walls and then the pain of metal twisting to the commands of a master. The creature from the first room was back. "Take her," said T'Challa while he handed Sphere over to Ororo. "I'll handle this one," continued T'Challa. Immediately Ororo manipulated the air currents. The air currents lifted Sphere and Ororo. The pair flew down a corridor. Meanwhile the room turned into a weapon against T'Challa. The metal walls grew thick spears that violently shot out at T'Challa. All the spears struck T'Challa about his upper body. But T'Challa was protected by the body armor. Nevertheless, the extended spears from the walls lifted T'Challa from the floor. Moreover, T'Challa's arms and hands were hampered by the crisscrossed spears. Therefore T'Challa was unable to fight with his sword. But his legs were untouched by the spears. The creature slowly extended itself from the walls. It laughed in a sinister manner. The mouth was toothless. The skin was grey. Chejula's tattoo was branded into the skin. "Sacrificed yourself for them. How heroic but otherwise foolish. Since I can take control of your armor," said the creature. The creature was close to T'Challa's face. "Before I go, at least tell me what the symbol on your skin means," said T'Challa. "I don't think so. That is too bad. T'Challa released the sword from his hand. He caught the sword's handle in between his ankles. Then T'Challa acrobatically shot his feet upward. The sword was thrust into the creature. The creature made a death sound. T'Challa released the sword. The spears receded a little and T'Challa fell on his feet. T'Challa took his sword from the creature and he attempted to follow Ororo down the corridor. A harpy flew through the wall. The harpy had orange and white hair on its head. The human face was disfigured. The rest of the body was like a hawk. The harpy was 3.5 feet tall. The cedula tattoo was on the right side of the neck. Harp. The harpy flew into T'Challa's body and it snatched his soul with its feet. The harpy exited T'Challa's body with almost half the soul. T'Challa briefly glimpsed his body from the outside. The harpy's talons were buried deep into T'Challa's soul and it pained. Still T'Challa struggled with the harpy. The harpy was relentless and it pulled T'Challa's soul roughly. Nonetheless T'Challa's soul clung onto his body. T'Challa felt like he was being torn in half. Eventually T'Challa's will provided the strength he needed. T'Challa pulled his way back slightly into the body. Then he regained his body's motor skills. Thus T'Challa swung his sword wildly at the harpy. There was an explosion of feathers as the sword struck its mark. T'Challa's soul slipped completely into his body. T'Challa dropped on his knees. His body burned and it felt strained. "Ororo," said T'Challa. T'Challa stood and continued down the corridor quickly. Meanwhile Ororo noticed that Sphere bled. Therefore Ororo stopped and she rested Sphere on the floor. Ororo attached the kimoyo to her belt. Then Ororo cut a strip from out her wind flap with the small knife, which she kept in her belt. Then Ororo bandaged Sphere's wound. Ororo raised her head and she spotted a security camera, which was focused on her. Ororo glimpsed the kimoyo and it indicated that 2 persons had closed in on her. The wall on the left of Ororo opened like a door. 2 women stood there and they were protected by a force field. The first woman had the cedula tattoo on her forehead. The second woman had no lower forearms, hence stubs dangled from the shoulders. Yet a green demonic arm and a clawed hand shot out of the woman's left stub. The new appendage became larger than the woman's body. Then the demonic appendage became elongated and it reached Ororo. The hand caught Ororo's entire body in its grip. The fingers were like a boa constrictor's coils around Ororo. The hand lifted Ororo to the ceiling. The hand squeezed on Ororo like a crusher. Ororo grimaced. Ororo heard bones crack within her body from the pressure. Moreover, Ororo was unable to breathe due to the strain on her lungs. The woman with the tattoo on her forehead planned to place a force field inside of Ororo's head and expand it. Yet Ororo was determined to live. But Ororo needed a tactic to defeat the women despite them being protected by the force field. Ororo concentrated and a bright flash of white light bombarded the immediate area. Instantaneously the 2 female attackers permanently lost their eyesight. The women screamed in horror. The amputee released Ororo and the demonic arm disappeared. While the tattoo on the forehead woman groped aimlessly. Both women screeched and complained. "Bring it back," shouted the amputee. Ororo fell onto the floor. She breathed heavily while she took stock of her environment. Sphere was still unconscious and T'Challa was running up to meet them. T'Challa assisted Ororo to her feet. Then T'Challa's senses alarmed. Something hurtled down the corridor. The Sphinx bolted into T'Challa and Ororo. The Sphinx grabbed T'Challa and Ororo by the throats. Then the Sphinx crashed through the wall with its prey. The Sphinx emerged from the second tower and its momentum took it into the highest floor on the first tower. The Sphinx broke through the wall. The entire top floor was a furnished room. Meanwhile, a hover pod that contained the other creatures left the second tower for the first. The Sphinx halted in the center of the room. Afterwards the Sphinx produced a triumphant shrill. The shrill damaged T'Challa's hypersensitive inner ears. As a result, T'Challa became disoriented. On the other hand, Ororo shot a lightning bolt through the Sphinx's beak and into the head. The lightning destroyed the head. The Sphinx dropped T'Challa and Ororo. But the Sphinx remained alive. Ororo fired plasma energy from close range through the Sphinx. Yet the creature functioned despite the damage. "Sword," said Ororo. The sword teleported from T'Challa and it went into Ororo's hand. Then Ororo slew the creature with the sword. Suddenly there was an explosion from the left side of the room. The floor ripped apart from the left side of the room towards Ororo. The attacker ran at such a speed that it seemed invisible and its feet destroyed the floor. Instinctively Ororo held the sword defensively. Then Ororo saw that her attacker. The attacker wielded a battle axe. The battle axe struck the sword's blade. The force of the impact pushed Ororo back until she reached the other side of the room. Ororo realized the attacker was in full-body metal armor. Dragon heads were on the armor's shoulders. A helmet hid the face. The attacker was 6'7" and muscular. Thus the attacker used its strength advantage against Ororo. Ororo manipulated the air around her. Yet the attacker was not pushed away. Secondly, Ororo tried lightning and it was useless. The attacker pressed down the battle axe onto the sword. As a result, the edge of the sword inched closer to cutting Ororo's face. Ororo used the attacker's strength against it. Ororo dipped. The attacker leaned forward above Ororo. Meanwhile, Ororo slashed the sword into the attacker's midsection. But the attacker's midsection disappeared as the sword passed through it. Then the midsection reappeared after the sword was gone. The attacker struck Ororo in the back of the head with the battle axe's handle. Then the attacker kicked Ororo forward. Ororo was knocked off her feet. T'Challa saw the commotion. He was still unbalanced. But T'Challa leapt fearlessly at the armored attacker. T'Challa's metal claws came out the fingertips of his gloves. The claws cut through most metals. Therefore T'Challa dug the claws into the hand that held the battle axe. The hand disappeared. But the battle axe fell and it stuck in the floor near to Ororo. Ororo noticed the Chedula mark on the battle axe. Then a face appeared on the battle axe. The eyes were red. The evil soul trapped in the battle axe smirked at Ororo. Ororo realized the truth. The battle axe contained the opponent. Hence Ororo stabbed the sword into the battle axe. The dark force energy blade eliminated the soul. Consequently, the armored attacker disappeared completely. T'Challa struggled to stand straight. Ororo attempted to help T'Challa. As a result, Ororo didn't notice the two new attackers at the room's entrance. The first attacker was a sticky black substance that formed a humanoid body. The next attacker was the green woman. The woman fired two energy projections. The energy projections were aimed at T'Challa. The energy projections caught T'Challa before Ororo reached him. The resultant explosion flung T'Challa into the air. The body armor saved him from death. Nevertheless, T'Challa landed hard and face first on the floor. Ororo was knocked back and the sword fell from her hand. Angrily, Ororo turned to the assailant and she concentrated. Suddenly the green woman was not there. Instead, a small tornado was in the green woman's place. The next attacker melted to the floor and it moved like an oil on the surface. The attacker quickly came upon Ororo, who knelt on the floor. The attacker stuck onto Ororo's skin. Ororo haplessly tried to pull the substance off her. Still the substance covered her eyes, her mouth, her nostrils, her hair, and every other inch of her body. Ororo began to suffocate. Ororo tried an emission of powerful electrical current from her body, but it was futile. Then she tried heat and it was in vain. Eventually Ororo was close to losing consciousness. Nevertheless Ororo fought to stay awake. T'Challa steadied his hand as best as he could. He carefully made an incision into the substance with the tip of the sword's blade. The substance reacted violently from the pain it felt from the sword. The substance rose sharply from Ororo. T'Challa swung the sword through the substance before it reached him. The substance died in the process. Another attacker clung to the ceiling directly above the couple. The attacker was a shapeshifter and it turned into T'Challa. The shapeshifter dropped from the ceiling. But the real T'Challa smelt the shapeshifter. Consequently T'Challa was guided by his sense of smell and he thrust the sword into the shapeshifter as it fell. Expertly T'Challa caught the deceased shapeshifter. Then T'Challa tossed the shapeshifter aside. Ororo coughed. T'Challa held Ororo in his arms. Suddenly the couple's life force drained from them. Additionally, the sword's computers lost power because they were created with life forces. Consequently T'Challa's and Ororo's bodies became limp. The life forces traveled into Baron. Baron's durability and strength grew to immense proportions. Baron surveyed the wrecked room. Broken wood, shattered glass, shards, and dust were everywhere. The antique furniture were destroyed and also the rare sculptures and paintings. Baron was infuriated by his loss of property and his trust in Midas's monsters. Although the monsters had weakened T'Challa and Ororo, they had failed to finish the job. "I'll do it myself," said Baron. Baron walked up to T'Challa. T'Challa held the sword in his right hand. T'Challa swung the sword. Baron caught T'Challa's sword hand when the blade was inches from his face. "Pathetic," said Baron. Baron pulled T'Challa's sword hand while he kicked T'Challa under the right arm. Crack! The right arm was dislocated from the arm socket. Then T'Challa received an uppercut from Baron. The sword slipped out of T'Challa's hand. The uppercut dispatched T'Challa to a few meters from Baron. Then Baron turned to Ororo and he held her roughly. Ororo fought back. But Baron considered the resistance punitive attempts. "My powers," muttered Ororo. "They depend on your mind and body. All of which depend on your life force which I'm consuming," said Baron. Ororo tapped into the energy of the earth for strength. Still nothing enabled Ororo with the power to repel Baron. Baron felt the surge of energy within Ororo and he absorbed it. "Still don't understand. It does not matter how much power you have. It all comes to me." "Your time has come," said Baron. "You may scream, there is no shame." Baron slammed Ororo into the floor. Astonishingly, Ororo still breathed. "Indomitable will," commented Baron. "Impressive." Baron felt the sword's life force increase. The twin computers had tapped into the time-space continuum for power. Baron released Ororo and he concentrated on the sword. The sword's new power was like a wellspring for Baron. Baron absorbed the power. T'Challa contacted Ororo through their chemo-yos unbeknownst to Baron. "Stop it," said the sword. "Without power we cannot keep the dark force energy blade from exploding." Baron was surprised the sword spoke. Yet Baron didn't chance the sword's warnings. Therefore Baron left a minimum level of power in the sword's computers. Then Baron returned his focus on Ororo to end her life. But Ororo was gone. Ororo had dragged herself away from Baron. Then Baron heard a noise behind him. Baron turned to the direction of the noise. T'Challa made the noise while he dragged himself along the ground. T'Challa was moving away from Baron. The Kimoyo was in T'Challa's good hand. Baron turned to Ororo and she had dragged herself further away. Futile, said Baron. T'Challa estimated that Ororo and him were at a safe distance. Sword, said T'Challa. The sword summoned its strength and it teleported from Baron to T'Challa. Baron snarled. Enough of, said Baron, and then he heard an engine. The engine sounded like that of a plane. The sound grew louder and louder from the ceiling. Baron looked up at the ceiling. The presidential jet crashed through the ceiling and it collided with Baron. The jet and Baron plummeted through the floors. Baron's durability saved him from death. Eventually the jet and Baron reached the basement floor. Then T'Challa activated the self-destruction of the presidential jet. There was an explosion in the basement floor that destroyed the tower's foundations. Teleport us to Wakanda, muttered T'Challa. We can't. We only have sufficient power for one short burst, said the sword. Then the next tower, said T'Challa. Instantaneously T'Challa, Ororo, and the sword teleport to the second tower. They appeared in the corridor where Sphere was left behind. Meanwhile Baron survived the explosion. But Baron used most of his durability power. Furthermore, Baron was cut off from the life force of others, therefore his durability and strength waned. Then the tower collapsed on Baron and he died. In the second tower, T'Challa and Ororo lay face down on the floor. Both suffered from injuries. Honey, are you still here? Asked Ororo. Still here, muttered T'Challa. Sphere approached the couple. Sphere was followed by two orbs, which contained the two blind women. Who is that? Asked Ororo. T'Challa looked up. The girl, answered T'Challa. Sphere looked at the couple. Sphere guessed that the couple had saved her life. They killed the other monsters and Midas's friend, thought Sphere. I'm free from Midas, said Sphere. What name did you just say? Asked Ororo while she stared up at Sphere. Midas, replied Sphere. King Midas? Asked Ororo. Yes. He sent us here, responded Sphere. I'll be damned, said Ororo. Ororo and T'Challa laughed gingerly. Then the couple lost consciousness. Sphere was uncertain if the couple were alive. She checked and they still breathed. What now? Asked Sphere. Give us time to regain our full power and we will go to Wakanda, said the sword. Therefore Sphere sat and she waited patiently because she didn't know where else to go. Chapter Midas viewed his watch. Why are you doing that? Asked Malice. Malice rested her hands on Midas's shoulders. Baron said he would call back after the Black Panther and Storm were done with, responded Midas. He hasn't called? Asked Malice. No, Malice sighed. This is our wedding night. It is not for worrying about enemies, said Malice. The Black Panther and Storm are coming, let them come and we will destroy them, said Malice and her eyes gleamed. Next story, Midas's Empire story. Midas' Empire danger. The animals in Eden Valley sensed it in the weather. Thus there was a hush in the valley. The tense atmosphere was created by Ororo while she approached Midas and Malice. Ororo's eyes gleamed. Lightning was in the palm of her hands. Ororo's natural white hair lifted slightly from her shoulders from the intermittent whines. Ororo's left hand brushed against T'Challa's hand as they walked. The couple's footsteps were in sync with each. Ororo glanced at T'Challa. Ororo couldn't see T'Challa's face because of his body armor's mask. Yet Ororo sensed that T'Challa and her shared the same intent of a full-out assault on Midas and Malice. Ororo and T'Challa stopped 10 paces away from Midas and Malice. Ororo observed that Midas was in a techno-body armor. The body armor was dark green. Ororo remembered that Midas was a slender man with an athletic physique. But the body armor made Midas larger. A helmet hid Midas's face. Moreover, Midas held a thick fighting staff in his right hand. Ororo saw that the staff was technological and that it stored a great amount of energy. Meanwhile, Malice's eyes gleamed. The black curly hair was in a ponytail. Malice carried a frown and it made the earring in her nose stand out. Furthermore, Malice wore a black and gold suit. Ororo felt T'Challa's hand as it brushed her arm. T'Challa took out the small communication cube from his belt and he tossed it to the ground in front of Midas. "We have 3 more like it," said T'Challa. Briefly, Ororo remembered Luciano, the proxy crime lord. Luciano was the former owner of the communication cube. T'Challa and Ororo had captured Luciano because he was backed by the Third Axis. Hence T'Challa and Ororo were able to trace Midas and Malice through the communication cubes. Malice didn't miss the symbolism in T'Challa's action with the communication cube. The act reminded Malice of a king throwing down the severed head of another king's general. Still, Malice wasn't intimidated. Moreover, Malice was curious about Shaitani's son and her adversary's connection. "One question. What is the warlord's son to you?" asked Malice. Ororo and Malice stood directly in line with each other. Ororo and Malice stared disdainfully into each other's face. Both women wanted a quick resolution to the confrontation and they formulated their attacks accordingly. It was just a matter of who would draw first. "He's related to me," answered Ororo. Malice chuckled. "I should have killed the runt then," said Malice. Thunder clapped in the sky and both women used it as a signal to attack. Ororo froze the air around Midas and Malice. Thus Midas and Malice were encased in ice. Concurrently, Malice transformed T'Challa's and Ororo's bodies into stone. The sword in T'Challa's hand teleported elsewhere. The two couples stood silently on the courtyard. Chapter Midas was still consciousness and he activated a proximity energy wave. The armor emitted a short energy burst and it broke the ice prison. Malice manipulated her molecules and she became intangible. As a result, Malice phased through the ice. Therefore, Malice left an empty ice shell of herself. However, T'Challa and Ororo were still stone statues. Midas seized the opportunity. Midas extended the staff and 2 purple energy spheres erupted from the tip of the staff. The first energy sphere destroyed T'Challa's head. The second energy sphere obliterated T'Challa's chest and right arm. Malice transformed her forearms into blades. Malice ran towards Ororo. Malice sliced Ororo's head into 2. Hence half of Ororo's head slid off and it broke on the courtyard's bricks. Afterwards, Malice sliced Ororo from the right shoulder to the left side of the abdomen. The stone made a rough sound while it slid. The stone fell and crashed onto the surface. Malice's forearms reverted to a human form and she became tangible. "You were foolhardy to face me," said Malice while she looked at the broken pieces of Ororo. Midas stared at the communication cube. Midas crushed the cube underneath his right heel. "It is finally over," said Midas. Malice held Midas's right arm as she walked past him. "We can now have time to ourselves," said Malice. Midas turned to the Chinese-style house, in which the couple stayed for their honeymoon. The 2-story house was the only structure in the secluded Eden Valley. Midas owned Eden Valley, which was in Central Asia. Additionally, Midas never disclosed the location of the honeymoon to his kingdom. Nonetheless, Midas and Malice had prepared themselves for combat in the event of T'Challa's and Ororo's arrival. Midas preferred the private execution of T'Challa and Ororo instead of a public one, which may have occurred in Chejula. Suddenly, Midas's early warning system told him that a projectile was headed for Malice. Midas snatched the projectile mere inches from Malice's neck. Malice was stunned. "What is it?" asked Malice. Midas opened his hand and a dart laid in it. Moreover, Midas's helmet computer analyzed the substance on the dart. The computer found that the substance was a sleeping agent. Midas's system indicated that several projectiles were on their way to Malice. "Guard yourself," said Midas. Malice became intangible and the darts passed through her. Malice glanced at the fallen T'Challa and Ororo. "They are dead, so who is out there?" thought Malice. T'Challa stared through the binoculars. T'Challa spied Midas, Malice, and the destroyed clones in the courtyard. The courtyard was 1.5 miles away from T'Challa's and Ororo's camouflaged position on a cliff. Ororo was on T'Challa's right and she utilized a binoculars. Ororo viewed the remnants of the clones. T'Challa and Ororo wanted to know the full extent of Midas's and Malice's powers, hence the clones were used. "We'll draw Midas out and take on Malice," said Ororo. "We'll have to take her up close," said T'Challa. "I'll provide the cover." T'Challa handed Ororo a small box of explosive-tipped darts. Ororo emptied the contents of the box in front of her. But the darts didn't fall on the ground. Instead, the darts floated due to manipulated air. Ororo concentrated and the darts shot forward on the air currents. The darts accelerated in seconds over the forest that separated the cliff from the courtyard. Ororo kept the path of the darts free from wayward wind disturbances. Eventually the darts accurately descended on Midas. T'Challa saw that Midas caught 2 of the darts while the rest exploded. Midas survived the explosions. Angrily, Midas flew into the sky. Ororo sent more darts at Midas. Midas tracked the origin and he headed at a fast pace for T'Challa's and Ororo's position. "He bought it," said T'Challa. T'Challa activated the small explosive device on his left side and he set the timer for 10 seconds. The sword was in front of T'Challa. "Teleport us to the courtyard," said T'Challa. The 2 time-space computers on the sword's hilt obeyed. The group vanished. Midas arrived and he scanned the area. Midas saw the explosive device. Instantaneously Midas knew he was tricked. The device exploded. T'Challa and Ororo appeared on the courtyard. They had no margin for error. Instantaneously Ororo created mist in the courtyard. Malice was caught off guard and she was blinded by the mist. Simultaneously T'Challa dashed forward at Malice and he dropped onto his knees. T'Challa skated on his knees as he passed Malice. T'Challa swung his sword and he slashed Malice on her left leg. The sword's dark force energy blade inflicted a minor injury on Malice's leg. As a result, Malice became tangible. T'Challa stopped and he rose sharply behind Malice. T'Challa's left forefinger damaged 3 nerves in Malice's neck. Malice lost consciousness and she fell to the left side. T'Challa caught Malice and he hoisted her onto his right shoulder. T'Challa teleported along with Malice to Wakanda's defense division. Acel and Nanites to dampen Malice's powers waited. Midas returned to the courtyard when T'Challa and Malice had teleported. Ororo sensed the arrival in the air currents. Midas's eyes glowed in a green light, which pierced the mist. Ororo dispersed the mist and she faced the physically imposing Midas. Midas hovered a few meters above Ororo. "You have one chance to answer me," said Midas. "Where is she?" "Chapter Disarm and Surrender," said Ororo authoritatively. "You had your chance," said Midas. Midas fired an energy sphere from the staff. Ororo dodged the energy sphere, which went into the courtyard. The energy sphere exploded. The entire courtyard was blown apart from the explosion. The force of the explosion threw Ororo through one of the house's windows. Ororo landed roughly in a hallway. Ororo's back was jarred. She was covered in glass and debris from the courtyard. Ororo lifted herself with air currents. Ororo looked about for Midas. He was still outside. "Good thought, Ororo. Ororo fired a lightning bolt from her fingertips. The lightning bolts created a hole in a nearby wall. Ororo flew through the hole and she emerged outside of the house. Ororo spotted Midas. Midas stood at the far end of the crater, which was once the courtyard. "You also had your chance," said Ororo. Ororo unleashed her powers on the house. Ororo lifted the stone and brick house from its foundation with a tornado. The house spun in the fierce cyclone. The sweeping inclined roof began tearing apart. There were multiple sounds of heavy objects falling within the house. The scent of raw earth pervaded the air as the tornado clawed into the ground. The house was lifted high over Ororo. Ororo's eyes gleamed while she mentally instructed the forces of nature. The tornado disappeared and hurricane winds hurled the house forward. Midas allowed the house to crash into him. Midas withstood the impact of the house and the hurricane winds. In the aftermath, Midas stood in the rubble and he stared defiantly at Ororo. "You will pay dearly for that," said Midas. Ororo wasn't done yet. Ororo called down lightning from the supercell thunderclouds, which had blackened the sky. The ferocious lightning descended on Midas. However, Midas held up his opened left palm. The lightning landed tamely in the palm. "Your tricks cannot protect you for long," shouted Midas. Midas flew at Ororo. Undaunted, Ororo flew at full speed towards Midas. Ororo fired plasma energy beams from her hands. The energy beams struck Midas in his chest and he was pitched backwards. Yet Ororo reached Midas while he was still in the air. Ororo intended to strike Midas in the face with a plasma energy beam. Midas activated the proximity energy wave. The energy wave pushed Ororo away. Midas crashed into the trees that were uprooted by the hurricane winds. Meanwhile, Ororo steadied herself in the air and she scanned for Midas. Midas laughed loudly. "I would have destroyed you when we first met if I had known it was so easy," said Midas. "I doubt that very much," said Ororo. "We shall see," said Midas. Midas shot up at Ororo. Ororo sensed Midas. Therefore Ororo created a pressure dome around her. The pressure dome slammed Midas into the crater. Midas gathered himself and he realized that T'Challa was a short distance from him. "Chapter, where is my wife?" asked Midas. "Gone," responded T'Challa. Midas thought that Malice was dead. Therefore Midas launched into T'Challa with blind rage. Midas held the fighting staff with both hands. Midas had the fighting staff above his head and he brought it down on T'Challa. The sword teleported from T'Challa's hand. Simultaneously T'Challa knelt on his left knee and he bent the right knee. T'Challa's hypervision allowed him to time the staff's descent. Moreover, T'Challa's quick reflexes meant that his hands met the fighting staff before it bashed his head. T'Challa held the fighting staff firmly between his hands. However, T'Challa's body strained against Midas's strength. Midas realized that T'Challa no longer had the sword. But it was too late. Midas felt a sharp pain in his back and he heard Ororo's war cry. Chapter killing was not Ororo's intention. The overall mission was to capture Midas and Malice alive. Therefore Ororo hadn't cut Midas too deeply. Ororo had diagonally slashed Midas's back. The sword's blade had pierced the Type 2 adamantium vibranium armor and Midas's flesh. Ororo's both hands were on the sword's handle and she was held up by the air currents. But Ororo didn't stop there. Ororo took her left hand from the sword handle and she fired small electrical bolts from her fingers' tips into Midas's wound. Midas took his hands off the fighting staff and he arched back due to the electrical surge through his body. Additionally, the armor suit was short-circuited and it reverted to a standby mode. The armor suit folded on itself. The helmet disassembled. Midas became unconscious and he fell onto the earth. Chapter Midas and Malice were handed over to the International Criminal Court. The couple was charged with crimes against humanity for the destruction done to the South Asia Pacific. T'Challa and Ororo had found evidence of the crime from Midas's beach house. Midas had used a facility under the beach house as a base for his empire. A reclusive sorcerer supreme teleport Vista to the limbo dimension. Furthermore, Midas's and Baron's holding companies were liquidated. The monies from the liquidation compensated the victims of the South Asia Pacific attack. Moreover, the artificial islands were still constructed. Additionally, Sphere left Wakanda and she went on a journey to see the world. Story: Enter Apocalypse Nyeri, Africa. Callus, disguised as an international journalist, drove into the Goma refugee camp at 10:30. He parked in the designated area. Afterwards he hopped out the Land Rover Jeep like a springy 20-year-old. It belied that he was 60. He wiped the perspiration caused by the morning heat from his face with a handkerchief. Meanwhile he gave the camp a good look around. The shabby and overcrowded, mostly women and noisy children camp reminded him of the others he had seen all over the world in his long career. A soldier approached him. Callus flashed his media badge at the young man. "I want to speak with Alex Soberk," said the spymaster in a fake British accent. The soldier checked the media badge and gave Callus a look over. "This way." The soldier nodded towards a brown tent that was a short distance from where the two stood. Eventually they arrived at the front of the tent, and the soldier poked his head inside. Identification of the visitor followed. Shortly thereafter, Dr. Alex Soberk emerged from the tent. He was mid-30s, lanky, with a fair amount of muscle on his bones. The brown eyes were sharp and moreover he resembled his father, the dictator of Aranzi. Something that made Soberk bitter whenever he looked in the mirror, because he didn't like his father. "I have already given enough interviews for the week," said Soberk in a voice tempered by Western education. "This is a different type of interview. It involves Africa and your latent magic," said Callus. Soberk's use of his abilities to help the sick had made him world famous. Nevertheless, the manner in which Callus had spoken made him suspicious. "Who are you really?" "The man that is going help you do more for this continent and the wider world." Soberk glanced at the soldier, and the officer melted away from the tent. Then Callus and Soberk entered the tent. Callus's scheme was simple. Soberk's powers were to be boosted to great magnitudes and he was to replace his father as ruler of Aranzi. Then the nation would offer its assistance to world. But the people Callus worked for would influence the country. All the while tighter isolation strategies would be placed on Wakanda, making it more difficult for other nations to receive help from them. Still, Soberk was no fool. He had followed Wakanda's recent push for the mutant policy in the UN and its subsequent approval. Several countries didn't like Wakanda's success, which went against their own interests. The approval showed that Wakanda had political influence, which had to be either curtailed or contained. Therefore Soberk knew he was being used as a pawn against Wakanda. But he had no intention of remaining one. However, Callus was operating on limited time, because the Black Panther and Storm were hunting him due to the Berlin incident. "But by the time they find me, it will be already too late," he thought as he made the deal with Soberk. Chapter: Stop or I'll crush him, shouted Muller Bayern. Ororo floated down on air currents in front of the mercenary and his hostage. Muller's bio-external armor gleamed. He held the slim man comfortably in his hands. He breathed heavily because of the chase through Bing Aram Island. Ororo stared at the determined mercenary. She knew he meant the words. "Still," thought Ororo. Then she was sharply raising her left hand and firing a lightning bolt into the terrified hostage. However, it did not kill him. The man merely became limp and passed out. Bemused, Muller looked at the wilted hostage and he released his hold slightly. It gave Ororo the opening to fire a stronger lightning bolt than the one before into Muller's exposed chest. The impact forced Muller through the wall he stood in front of while the hostage slipped out his grasps. The mercenary landed awkwardly, yet he scrambled onto his feet and ran towards the coastline. He wondered what happened to his twin brother who he had last seen being chased by T'Challa. A sudden bang came from the left of him. Instinctively he knew it was his brother and T'Challa fighting. "I have to help him," said Muller. However, a gust lifted him off his feet and he was carried some distance. Eventually he began falling. He splashed into a grey sandy substance. Instantly he realized that his body was sinking. "No, no, no!" Muller was yelling into the night air, and he was thrashing about as though he was drowning. Ororo had